Chapter 98. The combination of Andoin, Bolvar, and Duque was very interesting. In Lang's opinion, they were the typical loyal, important, and good ministers. However, it was precisely such a miraculous combination that gave unanimous advice. Lang couldn't help but nod, yes. Since there was no other way, why not fight to the death? Recalling all this, Lang suddenly came to a realization. Yes. I was cowardly. I was intimidated by Sargeras. But I swear, this will be the last time in my life that I will be cowardly. Lang's fingers pinched the railing of the balcony so hard that it was as if he wanted to leave 5 fingerprints on the white jade railing. The queen smiled brightly and gently pointed behind Lang. Lang looked back, and immediately saw William, who was hiding beside the pillar at the balcony entrance. Lang, that's right. A king should pass on his courage and virtue to the next king. The king and queen waved their hands together, and called the current little prince, the future King William Rhin, over. Child, I want to tell you a story about courage. Leylin picked up the young William and said, let me tell you a story about courage, Lang told William, who didn't quite understand what had happened not long ago. William especially admired Andoin, so William asked curiously, Father, why did Uncle Lothar and Brother Marcus risk their lives, and not you? Lang was slightly stunned, and then a gentle smile appeared on his face. Child, in this world, everyone has their own responsibilities. There are people who shoulder the future of millions of people, who are responsible for the safety of the people's lives and property, and who seek hope and salvation for the people. These people are the nobles, and the top of the nobles is the king. Little William said in a childish voice, Father, you are the king. Yes. There are also people who will stand up when the whole world is in danger, and fight against evil with their weak strength. Most of them would fail and die miserably. But there will always be a small number of people who will miraculously obtain the final victory. Therefore, everyone will call these people who have gathered courage, wisdom, and luck, heroes. There was a hopeful look in young William's eyes. Then, is Uncle Lothar a hero? Lang hugged William tightly, and tears welled up in his eyes. He said emotionally, I don't know, but every inch of my heart is praying for your Uncle Lothar. I hope that Lothar will become a hero and return in triumph. If he succeeds, even if I, the king, am to be buried under the glory of his hero, I am willing. At the same time, a group of cavalry was advancing rather quickly in Twilight Forest. The Twilight Forest was different from any other forest. The strange mist lingering above the forest all year round made it seem as if the entire forest had fallen into an eternal night. Sunlight could hardly penetrate the treetops and reach the ground, so most of the time, visibility in the forest was extremely poor. Even pedestrians walking in the forest had to carry a torch. Under such circumstances, galloping on a horse would be courting death. The group of people only let the horses trot at a small pace. Lothar, who was leading the group, raised his right fist, and the cavalry immediately pulled on the reins to raise their horses' heads. As the horses did not gallop fast, they completed the entire deceleration process in 2 to 3 steps. Take a break. Lothar instructed. He jumped off his warhorse agilely, handed the horse over to his attendant, and walked to the back of the group. Almost at the back of the group, he saw Duque, who looked like he was having a toothache. Hey, my little hero, looking at you now, it's hard for me to associate you with the young hero who was so generous in the meeting hall and didn't even bat an eyelid in the face of death. Duque grimaced in pain. What could he do? How could a transmigrator, a university student who grew up in the city, have the opportunity to ride a horse? Even after he transmigrated, he had found time to learn it. However, short-term training was completely different from riding a horse for a long distance. Horses were living creatures. Even if they had muscles on their backs to slow down the impact, they still could not compare to a small car with shock absorbers on a flat road. The jolts and the continuous galloping made Duque feel as if his internal organs had shifted. It was not an exaggeration. On the first day, Duque almost vomited last night's dinner. In just 2 days, they crossed nearly 300 kilometers of forest trails in the entire elven forest and entered the twilight forest. One had to know that this was not a modern highway before he transmigrated. Many of the trails were not even muddy roads. They were narrow paths that only hunters would take. At least 5 horses broke their legs because of the journey and had no choice but to give up. 2 cavalrymen almost broke their necks. The only good thing was that after entering the twilight forest, the speed of the horse slowed down, and Duque could catch his breath. Faced with Lothar's question, Duque panted heavily and glared at Lothar. "Bastard, laugh if you want. Don't give me a chance to laugh back." Lothar laughed and helped Duke off his horse, almost lifting him with his hands. Lothar's elite soldiers were busy in an orderly manner, either arranging sentries, feeding the horses, or standing in a circle vigilantly. They took out their canteens and sipped from them. Of course, many people looked at them with strange eyes. Because this combination was too strange. A knight, a mage, and a female orc. No matter how many times he looked at this combination, it was strange. "Human, you are too weak. In the tribe, a weak existence like you is not even fit to be a laborer," Garona said mercilessly. This strange orc woman was straightforward. If it came from someone else's mouth, it would be sarcastic. But she only felt that it was natural. Duque could not help but sigh at the magic of fate. Sure enough, after some communication, Lang and Lothar, just like in history, readily chose to accept Garona. After asking a lot about the orc tribe, they agreed to let this powerful female orc, who was familiar with the terrain of Karazhan, join the assault team. Duque rolled his eyes at Garona. "Come on, most of us human mages are like this." Actually, Duque wanted to say that the pharaoh here were all pampered. Unfortunately, Garona gave Duque a knowing blow. She showed a puzzled expression. "But us orcs, whether warlocks or shamans, are much stronger than you." Duque sighed. Sure enough, the styles were different. There was no way for their brain waves to intersect. But after this, if he didn't have to become a ghoul, he really had to consider training his body. Azeroth. All the famous women were definitely better at fighting than the other. If he was too weak, he really couldn't pick up girls. Lothar suddenly asked in a low voice, "What do you think our chances of beating Sargeras are?" Duque raised 2 fingers, not the V that represented victory, but 20%, and this is based on the premise that the soul of your old friend Medivh has not been completely annihilated. Chapter 99. Duque wasn't the type of person who was extremely adventurous. Duque wouldn't gamble with his life or anything like that. But gambling with his life became gambling with his moral integrity. That had a different meaning. In fact, when Sargeras will descended upon the meeting hall of the Storm Stronghold, a few lines of words appeared in Duque's system notification: important human nature, moral integrity, choice. In the eyes of the demon king Sargeras, you're just a slightly interesting ant. But you, who are familiar with history, realize that this may be a chance to change your fate. If you're really lucky and can force Sargeras into a corner and save the Demon King when he's about to lose, the system has determined that you have an 87% chance of transforming yourself into a powerful demon when you're conscious, and become one of the commanders of the Burning Legion. Of course, if you can help Anduin Lothar successfully kill Medivh and make Sargeras scram back to the abyss, then you'll undoubtedly become the hero of the entire world of Azeroth. According to the calculations of this system elf, you have a 999% chance of restoring all the missing moral integrity and soul power. You'll completely get rid of all possible negative soul states. The system didn't say what the outcome would be if he failed to challenge Medivh. But Duque could guess it. Dying under the fangs of a wild boar and dying in front of the Demon King were 2 completely different concepts. Just like in the future, the knights who died in the Scourge army would often be transformed into Death Knights. Falling into the hands of Sargeras, his soul was really, Duque had always thought of himself as immortal. He didn't have the Virgin Mary spirit to save the world, nor did he have the violent tendencies to do evil and destroy the world. Since he had transmigrated, he began to adapt to this world. The Martians and the Death Seekers fought, and many people died on both sides, and your friends and family fought with the violent and evil orcs, and many of your friends and family died. These were two completely different concepts. Not to mention a human, even he would feel heartache when a cat or dog that he had raised for a long time died. That was why, even though the history of Azeroth had been changed beyond imagination, especially when Khadgar, who was supposed to be the winner, had died, Duque could not bear to see Lothar go to Karazhan alone to die. No, it should be said that from the moment Sargeras arrived arrogantly in the meeting hall, Duque felt as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning, and he didn't like Sargeras at all. No matter what, Duque was already deeply involved with Stormwind, and even the entire world of Azeroth. Moreover, Duque was definitely unwilling to see the Burning Legion do whatever they wanted. Duque thought to himself, Khadgar, I'll make up for your share. Lothar didn't know what Duque was thinking. On the contrary, when Lothar heard Duque say that the success rate was no more than 20%, his face lit up. That's Sargeras we're talking about. As long as the success rate isn't 0, I'm already very happy. He slapped Duque's shoulder with his powerful palm. Not bad, young man. You actually thought the same as me. I'm starting to think that bringing you along was a wise decision. At least you're much more reliable than those court mages. When I see them, I always feel that these inflexible and dogmatic fellows will just stand there and compete with Medivh in terms of magic, and then be tortured to death one by one. Duque smiled, but didn't say anything. He knew that Lothar's words were a joke. Of course, the most important thing was that on the battlefield, Stormwind was at a complete disadvantage in terms of magic. The orc warlocks were much more terrifying than Duque had imagined. There were many things that Duque couldn't reveal too much about. This caused the Storm royal family's mages to be at a great disadvantage when fighting against these warlocks that they had never seen before. In a sense, warlocks who had more strange methods and could wear down their energy consumption were the nemesis of mages. The appearance of Cerberus, who specialized in countering mages, made the pharaoh's scalp go numb. Due to the death of one of Stormwind's 2 Morning Star mages, the strongest court mage by Lang's side, Stormwind was short on manpower. However, mages were necessary. Without them, if the enemy warlocks attacked, even if they only used fear to kill an officer in the human army, the entire battlefront would collapse. This was a vicious cycle. In any direct confrontation, without mages, military formations would easily collapse. With mages, when mages lost in a battle of magic, they would either die or flee. When the orc warlocks had free hands, they would still be defeated. In the entire elven forest, there were battles of resistance and pursuit. It could be said that the humans were being pushed back step by step. The entire Stormwind kingdom was permeated with an atmosphere of sadness and despair. However, it was under such circumstances that Noxus led his elites to attack. It was not that Duque had not asked these soldiers how they felt when faced with such a death mission. However, there was only one answer. For Azeroth. Duque saw smiles, and saw hearts that were willing to die for their country and their people. Their voices echoed in Duque's chest, and even in the skies of the human kingdom. It was like a lingering echo, echoing in Duque's ears over and over again. It was not an oath, but it was more touching and firmer than any oath in this world. Duque felt his blood being ignited by some kind of passionate flame, and it was incomparably hot. Faced with Noxus's theory of winning, Duque suddenly clapped his hands and said loudly, "Those who don't have missions, please come over here. I have something to announce." Noxus was a little curious, but he did not stop Duque, and nodded slightly. Immediately, a few adjutants waved their hands, and the elite knights quickly surrounded them. Duque stood on a big rock so that most people could see him. What you're going to face is also a group of opponents that exceed your imagination, demons. So, the first thing I hope you do is forget the military rules that Noxus taught you and learn what it means to be flexible. Duque's words caused a silent uproar, and almost all the soldiers looked at Noxus. Noxus smiled instead of being angry. "Go on, The soldiers I chose are the most intelligent, apart from loyalty and skill. As long as it helps us win, I don't mind you challenging the military rules I set this time. Duque nodded and continued, the enemies you're going to face are all far stronger than you are, and they control mysterious powers that you can't imagine. What strict military formations are synonymous with sending food to your death? Forget about your formations and military manuals. Avoid all the dazzling energy bodies, and look for opportunities to stab your sword into the opponent's back or anything that looks like the opponent's core. Chapter 100. After walking out of the twilight forest, the sky was once again reflected in their field of vision. After going through the torment of darkness in the twilight forest, he felt much better on the rugged headwind path. After walking for 2 days in a row, they finally couldn't find a suitable campsite on the third day because it was too close to Karazhan. As night fell, the assault team simply spent the night on the path by the cliff. On one side was a steep mountain wall, and on the other was a bottomless cliff. Lothar had no choice but to let the team of more than 200 people form a long snake. If Sargeras gets a group of his men to attack us here, we'll be finished, Anduin said to Duque. Duque smiled. Would you run tens of kilometers just to hit a mosquito? If he really underestimates us to that extent, that would be great, Anduin said. He will, because even though Sargeras has fallen, he's still a creation titan. To him, it's already a grievance to be able to hide in Mediva's body. He won't have the leisure to deal with us. Titans. A race of creation with divine power. About 150,000 years ago, the Titans formed the Pantheon and began their journey of creation. Sargeras was the Titan warrior who was responsible for defeating many evil creatures during the journey of creation. The Pantheon visited planet Azeroth, and after setting up many laboratories and creating their own servants, they set the order for the entire system to develop on its own before leaving. Later, a group of extremely powerful special parasitic creatures invaded the Titans' laboratory in Azeroth. They ruled the chaotic elements there and became the leader of the planet, the ancient gods. The army of the ancient gods grew stronger and stronger. While they ruled over Azeroth, they also infected many of the Titans' creations and servants, turning them from inorganic creatures to organic creatures. This was known as the Curse of Flesh and Blood. About 25,000 years ago, Sargeras betrayed the Pantheon Council, created the Burning Legion, and began his burning expedition with the purpose of destroying the experimental results of the other Titans. It was precisely because Sargeras was a Titan that he was destined to be proud and arrogant. Duque said slowly, arrogance is born from the heart. When victory has become a habit, when you are so powerful that you can crush all the weak creatures, your arrogant heart can no longer tolerate any other opinions. For Sargeras, stealing Mediva's body, killing the guy from the Tirisful Council, and defeating Egwene was already the limit of his condescension. So, before we enter Karazhan, we don't need to worry too much. Lothar nodded. I hope so. That was how Duque comforted Lothar. However, he was still a little uneasy. He kept praying in his heart, hoping that the history of Mediv being defeated would repeat itself. After all, he and the Stormwind Kingdom, and even the entire world of Azeroth, were inextricably linked. He looked up at the starry sky and saw a strange red light coming from the direction of the Swamp of Sorrows. Even at night, this evil red light still radiated a light that was thousands of times brighter than the moonlight. The red light and the darkness of midnight intertwined, as if a war of erosion and plunder was taking place. The stars above the elven forest were dim, as if they had been forced into a dead end by a huge dark red shadow. The star of storm standing in the northwest seemed to be falling at any time. And all the hopes of the entire kingdom were on Lothar, Garona, and him, Duque, these 3 tiny meteors. Would they be meteors that flashed by, or would they soar into the sky and shine brilliantly across the entire starry sky? Duque didn't know either. In a trance, Duque fell asleep. When he woke up again, it was already morning. Yes. The plan of attack that he had set with Lothar was to attack at dawn. When the group of people reached the outside of Karazhan, they were surprised to find that the light of the rising sun was rising from behind Karazhan. Like the flames of dawn, it was dispelling the haze entrenched in Karazhan. Lothar turned to Duque and Garona with a confident smile. Is this a sign that we are about to dispel the darkness and bring light? It's a good sign, isn't it? Garona rolled her eyes at Lothar. I never believe in luck, I only believe in my own strength. The strong will win. Both Andoin and Duque ignored the straightforward female beast man. Instead, Duque subconsciously asked, are we going through the front door or the back door? Andoin was puzzled. Back door? Are you talking about the platform provided for visitors to land on with griffins? Please, even though Medivh knows that we are likely to come, we can't just swagger over in a flock of griffins, can we? Who knows if we will be used as targets and shot down in midair? No, not that back door. Duque was a little worried. He didn't know how to explain that he knew about the back door in Karazhan from the game. However, there were more than 200 people on Lothar's side. Although they had agreed to attack, they couldn't possibly charge in slowly from the front door, right? If they did that, even if Sargeras was a hibernating bear, he would be woken up. Duque didn't know how Khadgar, Andoin, and Garona had easily reached the highest level of Karazhan in the history and fought with Medivh. Duque only knew that if it was Karazhan in the game, it would be so big that most first-timers would get lost. Remember, that was only the game version of Karazhan. In the real world of Azeroth, which had been magnified countless times in the Elven Forest, only God knew how big Karazhan was. Karazhan looked big enough from the outside, but the problem was that the Mage Tower was something that couldn't be described by science. The space inside the Mage Tower was often larger than it looked, because the Mage Tower would integrate all kinds of space magic. Besides, the owner of Karazhan was the astral mage Medivh. Now that Medivh was Medivh controlled by Sargeras, it was far from the Karazhan that was full of ghosts in Duque's memory. In the game, the experience gained from defeating the boss was likely to be useless. It was best to avoid fighting with the small boss and defeat Medivh directly. Follow me. Duque knew that it was useless to explain, so he simply led the way. A mage had many servants and followers, so there were many houses outside Karazhan. But now, these houses were all empty. Duque led Lothar and the assault team, and directly ignored the main gate of Karazhan. They crossed the river on the right side of the main gate that was not rushing. Then, they pushed open the unlatched door and entered a 3-story house. Duque turned left with familiarity, and saw a staircase. He walked up the stairs, and after a while, Lothar found a bridge that was very high above the ground. On the other side of the bridge was a secondary tower of Karazhan. However, in front of the secondary tower, there was a locked iron door. Damn, how did you know? Lothar looked as if he had seen a ghost. Duque shrugged. Well, here's the problem. I don't know how to pick a lock. I came here purely to try my luck. Now, we can return to the main gate. With a click, the sound of a lock being unlocked came from behind Duque. Garona smiled. The lock is open, and then... Pfft, Duque choked. Chapter 101. How important was the back door in Karazhan? It was hard to answer this question. Duque didn't know what the world of Azeroth, which was 80% similar to the world of Warcraft that he knew, would be like. He only knew that from ancient times until now, anyone who fought their way in through the front door was either extremely powerful or extremely stupid. In this world, the higher the status of the Mage Tower, the higher the Mage Tower. Medivh must be at the top of the tower. Okay, here's the problem. According to the game, Karazhan had 12 bosses of various sizes. Of course, this wasn't the ruins of Karazhan that were filled with ghosts, immortals, and demons after Medivh died in the game. Many of the monsters and bosses that Duque had imagined wouldn't appear. However, looking at the house where the human servants lived in front of the Karazhan Mage Tower, he could see that nothing good would come from the front door. Demonic humans? Or monsters summoned by Sargeras from another world? No matter which it was, he was sure that entering from the front door would lead him directly into Sargeras' playground. This was a battle with a great disparity in strength. Even with two hero-level characters, Noxus and Garona, on his side, they still couldn't defeat Medivh, who had the advantage of the Mage Tower. The most important thing was to reduce the number and intensity of the battles and try to fight Medivh in his strongest state. According to the game, going through the back door meant that at least half of the bosses were avoided or killed. In this case, it was very advantageous. Duque glanced at Garona, who was smug and had a "praise me" expression, and he suddenly lost his temper. Noxus didn't know if he was being honest or not, but he appropriately expressed his surprise and amazement. "Oh my god. How did you do it? Just now, one of my best rogues winked at me and told me that he couldn't handle it." Garona put her hands on her hips. "Hee hee. When you've been imprisoned countless times and tried to escape from the cage countless times, no lock in the world can stop you, no matter if it's a magic lock or an ordinary lock." Duque rolled his eyes. "If you're so awesome, why don't you fly?" It turned out that he had reached the master level in Hidden Room Escape. Lothar drew his sword. "Okay, next question. Duque, where does this door lead to? Do you have any information or leads?" Duque was embarrassed. "Do I have to recite the name of the boss in the game for you?" Duque could only shrug. "I don't know. Even my teacher only told me that there is a back door in Karazhan. At least we can bypass the stable, the servants' rest area, and the reception area for nobles." At this time, Reginald Windsor stepped forward and asked, "What's the point of avoiding these areas?" Duque rolled his eyes again. Yes, Duke had brought Windsor, just as he had in the history. Even though history had greatly deviated, aside from the fact that Khadgar had been killed, Duque still tried his best to restore the history of the weak defeating the strong. Of course, Windsor had changed from a soldier of Lothar to a follower of Duque. This was also a big change. Duque still believed that just as Lothar should have been blessed by the goddess of fate, Windsor should not have died in this place. Windsor was still relatively young now, so Duque could only patiently explain. Originally in Karazhan, there were hundreds of servants helping to take care of the entire Mage Tower. But now they are all gone. The most likely reason is that they have all been turned into demons by Sargeras, or demonized creatures. Bypassing these areas is also to reduce unnecessary casualties. Of course, a feint is still necessary. What is a feint? Garona suddenly asked. Duque slapped his forehead. There was a female orc with the wrong brain waves. How troublesome. Windsor, explain to Garona. Duque turned to look at Lothar. If we go through the back door, I have a 70% chance of avoiding more than half of the enemies and killing my way to Medivh within an hour. But nothing is absolutely safe. You are the commander, and the decision is in your hands. Okay, the main force will go through the back door, Lothar agreed decisively. Ah. Lothar's straightforwardness made Duque, who had prepared a bellyful of excuses, a little stunned. Lothar patted Duque on the shoulder, his hearty and extremely rich face full of magnanimity. Have some confidence in yourself. In the field of mystery, you are the expert. Since you have used your actions to prove your loyalty to the kingdom and to humans, what's wrong with us outsiders putting our lives in your hands? Anyway, I will be satisfied if we can achieve some results against Sargeras. Okay, then I will cross the line. Everyone listen to me, we will set up like this. At the highest level of Karazhan, Medivh was sprawled out on a deck chair. If anyone saw it, they would be surprised to find that there were dozens of light screens floating in the void around Medivh. Each light screen had a different picture, and many of them had nothing to do with the world of Azeroth at first glance. The scenes on these light screens were like movies that had been played in 10 times faster speed, as if the entire river of time had been accelerated. However, no matter which picture it was, there was the same theme, destruction and killing. In different corners of the universe, the Burning Legion was wantonly destroying, endlessly spreading death. Sargeras, who was attached to Medivh, found that his entire spiritual sea was full of the same wailing and begging. Sargeras, Medivh, frowned. He was a little tired of it. With a light snap of his fingers, the entire spiritual space became quiet. Only the sound of chaos magic surging through the void and transmitted from his body was left. This sound was so strong, like the whistling of a wild wind. Even though his body was sealed and dormant, Sargeras could feel how wonderful his condition was. Sargeras didn't even need to move a finger. His vision crossed the space of Karazhan, and his eyes reflected the entire aperture on planet Azeroth. This aperture emitted a bright and mysterious brilliance, rejecting the direct invasion of all pure-blooded demons. However, everything changed because of the invasion of the orcs. Sargeras could see the orcs, who had drunk the demon's blood, crossing the void and entering the world of Azeroth. As the orcs entered, the power of the Circle of Light began to weaken at a rate that was undetectable to the naked eye. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. I need more demonized orcs to pollute this land. Sargeras muttered to himself as he tried to think of a way to speed up the countdown to the destruction of this world. Suddenly, he sensed an intruder. Chapter 102. Draw your swords. The future Marshal Reginald Windsor's voice was still childish. He did not know why Duque had asked him to lead this elite troop of 200. He also did not know why this troop, which made up more than 90% of the assault team, was used as a feint. He only knew that Duque, who had become his master, and Anduin Lothar, whom he admired the most, had placed their utmost trust in him. This trust was very heavy. I'll leave my men to you, Lothar said. A soldier who doesn't want to be a marshal is not a good soldier. Reggie, I have high hopes for you, but you also need to prove yourself. This is your chance. Duque patted his shoulder. Windsor was already very grateful to have the honor of fighting for the kingdom in ruins. He was sure that he did not follow the wrong person. Duque, who seemed to be mysterious, was actually a great hero of the kingdom. Now that he heard their trust in him, Windsor's eyes almost teared up. The appointed time had arrived. In the first rays of the morning sun, the long sword was raised high, bringing with it the brilliance of the sun, like an arc of flames. Enchanted weapon, Demon Slayer. This mid-tier enchantment could permanently enchant a close-range weapon, giving it a chance to stun a demon and deal extra damage. To be honest, this was not a weapon that a soldier could have. Even the chief swordsman of the noble families might not have one. However, the rich and capricious Duque found an enchantment master and enchanted all the swords used by the 200 warriors with Demon Slayer. Windsor didn't know how powerful the enchantment was, but he could sense a holy aura from it, which delighted every warrior. Windsor's figure stood proudly in the morning light. The elite warriors of Stormwind all looked at him and raised their long swords at the same time. Light filled the air, and the cold glint of the blades was faintly discernible. It was like the first light of dawn spreading across the dark land, driving away the darkness. Charge! Bearing in mind Duque's repeated warnings, Windsor didn't advance in a strict military formation, instead using an even more disorganized charge. The battlefront began to push forward. Unknowingly, the pace of every soldier was quietly increasing, and their strides became larger. After a short 10 meters, almost every soldier was fighting to be the first to run. For Azeroth. For His Majesty Rin. For my lover, the soldiers shouted messy slogans, but they quietly changed their formation in the midst of their charge. 8 warriors holding siege hammers used to break down doors had already reached the front line at some point. Quang Dang, the iron gate, which was as tall as 3 people, broke into pieces. Karazhan was not a fortress, and there was no moat. Even the iron gate and wooden door at the gate were more for decoration. The defense of a mage tower never relied on external objects. Perhaps it could be said that they were able to successfully approach the gate of Karazhan because Sargeras ignored them. Rumble. The door also fell down. The brave warriors with torches in their hands killed their way in. Then, under the illumination of the fire and the torches inside the gate, they saw their enemy, Satyr. A demon with cracked hooves, unkempt goat legs, goat-like horns, razor-sharp claws, and a long lion's tail. The origin of Satyr could be traced back to the ancient war. Among the High Elves, there was a Kaldorei noble named Havis, who was Queen Azhara's most trusted and closest advisor. Havis was one of the main culprits who led the Legion into Azeroth, and as the ancient war progressed, he brought more and more suffering to his race. But he was finally defeated in an encounter with the young druid Malfurion Tempest. Malfurion had completely destroyed his sinful body. However, Sargeras felt that Havis still had value, so he resurrected him and became the first satyr in the world. As long as there was a strong enough demon curse, and the target's will wasn't strong enough, satyrs could easily turn other creatures into satyrs. Although most of the satyrs' bodies had become inflated, and most of them were more than 2 meters tall, Windsor and the others could tell from the clothes that these satyrs had left that they were satyrs who had once served Medivh. Windsor's eyes narrowed slightly, and only one word came out of his mouth. Kill. The assault force of Stormwind was like a flaming rocket, instantly breaking through the group of satyrs. Now that he was within close combat range, Windsor could even see the red flames flickering in the eyes of these purple-furred demons. What kind of chaos and madness was that? The warriors of Stormwind were heroic. As elites personally selected by Lothar, they couldn't help but feel nervous even when facing such an unknown opponent. But when they saw the young figure at the front of the team, they couldn't help but feel more courageous. At some point, Windsor, who was leading the charge, had become their flag. The satyrs screamed. Their sharp and unpleasant roars were enough to make anyone with a weak mind tremble. Windsor's sword was very steady. When he was 2 meters away from the first demon, a visible wave of flames burst out from the blade's edge, forming a blade wind in the air. In the blink of an eye, the entire sword's killing range more than doubled. The golden light of the sword was even more dazzling under the flickering flames. It split the dark void with a halo-like brilliance, sweeping across the first row of satyrs with a whoosh. Strangely, there was a burst of sound in the air. The row of satyrs who were 2 meters tall all became 1 meter tall. That was because their entire upper bodies had been sliced off. The impact of Demon Slayer completely blew away their broken upper bodies. Not every warrior who fought against the demons was as lucky as Windsor, but a sword enchanted by Demon Slayer often emitted a holy aura that was enough to shock the satyrs. The first wave of human soldiers were all unharmed. There's hope. In the face of these human soldiers who were armed to the teeth, these newborn satyrs were as weak as chicks that had just hatched. Even a slightly weaker warrior could kill these farmers and servants who had turned into satyrs in 3 rounds. Kill all the demons. As soon as Windsor finished shouting, he suddenly felt a shiver pass through his body. That feeling gave him goosebumps. Turning his head, he saw a red-skinned evil demon riding a flaming warhorse slowly appear at the wide entrance of the passage. The thunderous galloping of the horses, the squeaking of the air, and the scattering satyrs. Everything was telling Windsor that something was wrong. This guy in front of him was not to be trifled with. The guy suddenly said, "Come on, Midnight. Let's destroy this mob together." Everything in his field of vision was still the same color as before. The flames of hell and the cries of the Grim Reaper were still wantonly roaring. His comrade in arms not too long ago had perfectly demonstrated what it meant to leave the world forever. The fear of death spread rapidly, but Windsor didn't feel it at all. His heart was filled with nervousness. This nervousness didn't come from fear, but from a heavy sense of responsibility. It came from Anduin and Duque's trust. The comrades beside him weren't afraid of death. From the moment they'd accepted this mission, they'd already cast aside life and death. But Windsor at least hoped that even if they died, it would be a meaningful death. He wanted them to die on the path to victory. The situation was too chaotic, and command was meaningless. Thus, Windsor decided to do it himself. He saw an opportunity. It was a moment that could not be missed. Just as the nightmare beast, Midnight, knocked away a warrior not far from Windsor at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye, and just as Atumen the hunter was about to follow up with another slash, Windsor suddenly launched his charge. This wasn't an ordinary charge. This was the charge of a warrior. With a whoosh, Windsor slammed into the side of the nightmare beast, leaving behind a long afterimage. The momentum was so great that even the majestic nightmare beast couldn't help but stagger. Come, four-legged worm. Let's fight to our heart's content. Midnight understood human nature. Windsor's taunt made it very unhappy, but before it could react, a shield engraved with the emblem of the Stormwind Lion gave it a hard blow. Shield slam, the heavy blow made its mouth crooked. Ha! Atumen the huntsman followed up with a cleave, but it was parried by Windsor's enchanted sword, Demon Slayer, which could not have been more accurate. The situation of the battle suddenly changed. It was Windsor's brave battle that caused the unstoppable Atumen to fall into the siege of the elite warriors of Stormwind City, on the other side, at the back door of Karazhan. Noxus, on the other hand, was a little anxious. After Duke ordered Windsor to attack, there was no movement on the other side. What are you waiting for? It wasn't that Lothar hadn't seen the mysteriousness of the pharaoh. For someone like Duque, who refused to enter the back door and hid by the door, looking like he was eavesdropping, Lothar really couldn't figure out if Duque was really performing magic, or if he was simply eavesdropping like a thief. But what was he eavesdropping on? If it was a diversion, why hadn't he acted yet? Lothar's head was full of question marks. Out of trust in Duque, Lothar still didn't say a word. He waited near the back door with his 24 most capable men and the board Garona. Not to mention, Duque was really carrying out a big project, eavesdropping. Diversion was a good strategy, but it depended on who it was used on. If it was used in a place where communication was inconvenient and alarm messages could only be transmitted in the most primitive way, diversion would definitely be successful. But this was Medivh's Karazhan. If it wasn't for Sargeras being too arrogant and lazy to even explore the wide area, or deliberately waiting for them to come, they wouldn't even be able to reach the edge of Karazhan. Entering Karazhan was like a mosquito sucking blood from a human body. It might not be felt in the short term, but it would definitely be felt after a long time. Duque was trying to find a way to turn a forceful attack into a surprise attack again. Duque wanted to verify a guess of his. An invisible ripple was spreading in all directions with the highest point of the Karazhan Wizard Tower as the center. The principle was like radar waves. Through active sonar, a circle of arcane energy rippled out, and when it hit something, there would be a weak ripple back to the highest point of the Wizard Tower. To the people of this world, this kind of principle was simply a fantasy. But for a transmigrator like Duque, it was nothing. Got it. Chapter 104. The unknown demonic energy fluctuated slightly, with different lengths between the peaks and troughs. It was not something that humans could control. Also, it was a language of Eridar, commonly known as the demonic language. This would definitely stump 99% of the mages in the world, but not Duque. That was because Duque had the system elf. This kind of unchanging question and answer every 5 minutes, even though there were extremely complicated fluctuations, these fluctuations were unchanging. When the system elf repeatedly assured Duque that it could perfectly imitate it, Duque smiled at Lothar. I can use a little trick that only mages know to hide from Medivh for a while. I think before we get close enough to Medivh, no matter how many of his men we kill, he won't notice. Lothar's eyes lit up when he heard this. If he could get close to Medivh, he might have a chance. What was most afraid of? Being drowned by endless demons before they could see Medivh. He and his men were very strong. No matter how strong they were still human. As long as they were human, they would be tired and prone to mistakes. It could be said that the longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. Duque's appearance directly reversed this point. Okay, come with me. Duque waved his hand. No, let's go together. Lothar held a shield in his left hand and a sword in his right. Duque suddenly noticed that Lothar's sword seemed to be fundamentally different from the one he usually held. It's an ancestral thing. But it should be quite useful, Lothar said casually. Duque's mouth opened wide. If he hadn't been barely able to control himself, he would have probably screamed. Who was Lothar's ancestor? The former ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, Thoradin the Great. An ancestral treasure sword. Wasn't that the Emperor's sword? As if he had seen through Duque's surprise, Lothar said indifferently, "It's not as mysterious as you think. However, taking this sword out at ordinary times will indeed provoke the nobles of the Stormwind Kingdom." Duque did not dare to ask any more questions. If he did, it would be Lothar's dark history. In fact, Duque couldn't understand why a descendant of Thoradin the Great would become a subordinate of House Rin. Duque brought Lothar and the others into Karazhan. Almost as soon as he stepped through the back door, Duque felt something was wrong. It was a feeling of chaos, as if time and space had been reversed. No matter how one looked at it, this was inevitable. In the primordial era, an unknown explosion occurred in the southern section of the Riedridge mountain range, forming a crater, which was the current upwind trail. The space-time in the middle of the crater turned illusory, folded, and became a space-time node in the universe, connecting many other worlds and the distorted void. Countless years later, the astral mage Medivh was attracted by the space-time characteristics here. In order to study this place for a long time, he built a tower in the center of the node and settled down. This was today's Tower of Karazhan. King Lang of Stormwind granted this place to Medivh and gave him the title of Karazhan's Master. After integrating the power of Medivh, the guardian of Azeroth, the Tower of Karazhan gradually merged with the space-time node, and the tower itself became a part of this special space-time. This folded and distorted spacetime was also the cause of Karazhan's illusions. Karazhan's illusions were not illusions or ghosts, but real, fragments of the past and future. They were involved in the chaotic spacetime and appeared in places that should not be. So, in Karazhan, there would be many unreasonable things. For example, all he could see now were books. There were all kinds of books, not just magic books, but also a large number of humanities, geography, and history books. But these were all visual illusions. Listen, follow me and step on a math book. Math book? Lothar was puzzled. If you don't want to fly to another planet the next moment, follow me. Duque carefully jumped on the books scattered on the ground. If it wasn't for the system elf scan, he would have thought that these were just ordinary books. After the system scan, he was shocked to find that most of the ground here was actually an illusion. If he took one wrong step and was lucky, he might be able to return to Earth. If he was unlucky, that mutilated corpse of an unknown race over there ended up like that. Half of its body was cut off in a circular arc. The group of guys followed Duque, jumping left and right for a few minutes before leaving this area. Although it was a bit funny for a group of big men wearing armor and carrying long swords to jump around, this kind of deadly situation was really not funny. The only good thing was that it seemed that no one who came in was left behind. Then, when Duque led the way through the illusion of a bookshelf, Duque's expression changed slightly. He saw a downward ramp. Below the ramp, there was a faint smell of sulfur. What? Did you think of something? Satyr. And it's the satyr that attracts imps, imps. Duque almost blurted out Tristan Darkhoof's name. As a very powerful earth mage, Duque knew where his limits were. Although his casting ability had surpassed many sky mages, he was still essentially an earth mage. He didn't know what level he was in the original game. He only knew that Karazhan wasn't a good place for newbies to play. In a sense, he didn't know how many levels he had skipped to come to Karazhan. If it was simply a player from before he traveled to this world, he would really be looking for death. However, when the players fought here, it was only the players themselves. Duque came with 3 heroes and more than 200 elite warriors to explore. This feeling made Duque feel very uncomfortable. If the opponent this time wasn't Medivh, it would be a classic example of hugging someone's thigh. And it was Lothar, the perfect thigh. Is there anything to pay attention to? Lothar asked softly. It's best if it doesn't become a protracted battle. Because this summoning type of satyr, given enough time, he can easily create an army. Okay, I'll go first. It wasn't Lothar who spoke, but Garona. At that moment, Duque almost had a heart attack. Because he saw Garona, a half-orc with a straight line of thought, rushed directly into the secret room where Darkhoof was at the speed of lightning. Follow her. Not only Duque, but Lothar was also stunned. He knew that most orcs had the word brave engraved on their chests, but he didn't think that even a female half-orc like Garona could be so fierce. He was almost running as he followed Garona into the room that was filled with dim red light. Even the floor was covered with complicated red magic arrays. Chapter 105. The anticipated battle did not start immediately. Garona held a strange bone dagger in her hand. She was clearly hesitating. Because in this large room that was more than 100 square meters, she saw a standard blonde human youth. He was a human who looked very similar to the human nobles she saw in the Storm Fortress. This made her extremely confused. Although her instincts told her that something was wrong, her rationality still took over her body. She stopped. The moment Duque saw this, he would rather Garona continue to be reckless. In the world marked by the system elf, this guy's head was clearly marked with a large red skull, and his race was marked as satyr. Kill him. Duque's shout seemed to be a little late. The blonde nobleman suddenly had a mocking expression on his face. He opened his mouth slightly and screamed. A crimson-red smoke came out of his mouth, followed by his eyes, nostrils, and ears. In less than 2 seconds, the red smoke that seemed to have a life of its own turned into some kind of corrosive substance, melting the nobleman's facial features like molten wax and turning into a blurry human figure. Right in front of the 20 ambushers, he transformed. An evil rune circle that emitted a foul smell wrapped around him, rejecting all external attacks. Duque and the others could only watch as this guy knelt down powerlessly and curled up on the ground. His skin turned red, and then, like a poisonous snake shedding its skin, the thing inside was peeled off from this lifeless, soulless human shell. The red runes that enveloped this guy suddenly exploded and shot in all directions. Duque only had time to cast a shield made of arcane energy before the strange runes reached him. This was not a particularly premeditated attack. The exploding runes were very messy. Unfortunately, there were still a few elite warriors who could not dodge in time and were affected. Even though their hands and feet were protected by sturdy armor, just a little bit of contact was enough to directly burn through the armor. When the runes touched them, they felt a burning sensation as if they were splashed with high-temperature molten steel. Naturally, there were also priests who entered with Noxus. Lothar was prepared to launch a surprise attack, so he didn't care if he was discovered. After the warrior hurriedly took off his gauntlets, the middle-aged priest tried to use the power of the holy light to dispel the red runes on the warrior's arm. However, he was shocked to find that his power was powerless. The highly corrosive runes spread out from the wound like a plague. Noxus's pupils constricted. He raised his sword and cut off a large piece of flesh from the victim's arm. The rest of the warriors were similarly dealt with. Everyone's expression changed. This was the most typical demonic power. Ha ha ha. Puny humans. Why did you come here to die? The red light faded, and a satyr with a huge goat head appeared. Accompanied by a burst of arrogant laughter, a typical satyr appeared in front of everyone. Unexpectedly, the other party did not attack immediately. On the other hand, the red-skinned satyr bowed to Lothar in a nondescript aristocratic manner. He placed his left hand on his right chest and used his right hand to fling away the cap on his head. Then, he bowed slightly and nodded. You must be Anduin Lothar, aren't you? I, Tristan Darkhoof, salute you, Tristan said in standard human language. Anduin noticed that this guy actually spoke with a very standard aristocratic accent of the Rotterdam kingdom. Anduin's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Are you waiting for me? Waiting? No, this is just an accident. It seems that your little mage is quite strong. In fact, I didn't even feel your arrival before your Orc scout sneaked into my room. However, since you're here, everyone except Sir Lothar can go to hell. More than one person noticed Tristan's subtle words. Obviously, everyone's life was meaningless to Sargeras except Lothar. I hate you. Garona didn't have the patience to listen to the satyr's nonsense. She immediately attacked. For the first time, Anduin and Duque witnessed Garona's attack with their own eyes. A series of cold lights suddenly burst forth. Garona's attack was so fast that Duque subconsciously thought of the term bullet screen. It was a bullet screen made up of countless hot weapons. The light and shadow left behind by the projectile clearly showed how fast Garona's attack was. Almost everyone on Lothar's side felt like they were in a dream. They all covered their hearts and asked themselves if they could withstand such an attack. Even Lothar, who had tried to fight with Garona before, was also shocked and doubtful. This female orc was too powerful. Garona wasn't short. She was 1.8 meters tall, and even taller than many men. Despite her slender body, she was actually stronger than many human warriors in terms of muscle strength. Such a burly woman actually had agility and speed that exceeded most people's dynamic vision. It really surprised everyone. Such an attack actually couldn't achieve its full effect in one blow. On the floor that was full of runes, there were long traces of sharp weapons crisscrossing, some of which were already more than an inch wide. Those were the traces left by Tristan when he dodged Garona's fierce attack. This demon also had superhuman agility. However, Tristan Darkhoof was not an existence that could be easily beaten. He suddenly let out a low roar, and the room full of bookshelves suddenly felt like it was about to collapse. Many books fell from the bookshelves, and some green-blue imps that were only a little taller than a human's knees suddenly rushed out from behind the bookshelves. Not only the bookshelves, but in the void in the room and even on the roof, more than a dozen blood-red teleportation portals opened. However, the other side of the teleportation portals wasn't a good place with birds and flowers. It should be some kind of terrifying space full of evil. Countless imps rushed out of the teleportation portals, and without saying a word, they directly threw small fireballs at the human warriors in the room. For the sake of flexibility, Lothar's elite soldiers didn't choose the cumbersome tower shield. Most of them used the standard Storm City Zither-shaped shield. Obviously, this kind of shield was not enough to protect them from fireballs coming from all directions. Digga, a 28-year-old veteran soldier, joined the army at the age of 16. He had fought fishmen, killed gnolls, fought beasts, and fought against orcs. As a warrior in the Golden Age, his experience could not be said to be not rich. However, when faced with the unknown mysterious attack, he was momentarily stunned. The fireball came at him at high speed, and the rapidly expanding light in his field of vision made him ready to close his eyes and wait for death. However, it was at this moment that a bright blue light suddenly flashed behind him. However, even though her neck was as thick as 2 detonators, she still could not move the demon chains on her body. The beast men never lacked power, but unfortunately, the mysterious power was not something that could be shaken by brute force. Lothar seemed to want to save Garona, but Duque stopped him. I'll do it, you go after Sietue. Lothar didn't know why Duque made such an arrangement, but he still followed it. The gorgeous sword that emitted a faint golden glow drew a bright arc in the air and slashed at Siehoof. As a kind of demon that liked to abuse others, Sartre not only had good spellcasting abilities, but their melee combat abilities were also not to be underestimated. Seeing the aggressive Lothar, Siehoof actually took out a huge scimitar out of nowhere and started fighting with Lothar. Holding the scimitar in his right hand and waving his claws in his left, he attacked quickly and flexibly, pushing Lothar back. Duque did not care about Lothar. If Lothar was killed like this, then he did not deserve to be called the Lion of Azeroth by the future generations. He shifted his firepower and suddenly blasted it at Garona's chains. It was not an easy task. In the real world, there was no such simple and convenient spell that forbade hurting one's allies. A hit was a hit. Even if Garona had a physique that surpassed humans, she was still an orc at the hero level. Duque was very doubtful that his arcane missiles could hit Garona when she was free to move. But when her body was bound, Garona was a live target. Seeing the overwhelming arcane missiles pouring down, Garona's face showed a frightened expression for the first time. Most orcs were simple-minded and ignorant. When faced with the unknown, it was easy for them to feel awe. Before the orc warlocks were born, they transferred their awe of the unknown and mystery to the shamans. Therefore, orc shamans often had a very high status. Similarly, although she was a mixed blood, Garona still inherited the awe of mystery. Seeing so many arcane missiles, Garona almost suspected that Duque was going to kill her. However, that was not the case. Duque was very clear about Garona's position in the long river of Azeroth's fate. Perhaps there would be such a day when Duque would really attack Garona, but definitely not now. Like a rainstorm, the arcane missiles accurately hit the scarlet demonic chains. Originally, Duque was still worried that his spells could not transcend levels and destroy the demonic chains made by the boss Evil Hoof. He did not know if Lothar's mysterious sword restrained Evil Hoof, or if Evil Hoof's spell itself had a flaw or some strange setting. Duque's attack worked. Under the bombardment of arcane missiles that were as dense as a storm, the thick bloody chains let out a series of tinkling noises before they shattered inch by inch in Garona's and Lothar's peripheral vision. Regaining her freedom, Garona let out an angry roar, and at the same time, she did not forget to cast a grateful look at Duque, and pounced on him again. As if surprised by the ferocity of Duque's firepower, Tristan Evil Hoof was caught off guard. As if they had practiced countless times, Lothar and Garona's cooperation was extremely tacit. Lothar attacked fiercely from the front, and his swordsmanship was wide open. In the face of every counterattack from Evil Hoof, Lothar's shield could just perfectly deflect most of Evil Hoof's power with a side attack, making Evil Hoof's fierce attacks useless. And taking advantage of Evil Hoof's flaws, he gave a fierce stab. Garona, on the other hand, focused on going around Evil Hoof's back to stab him. The attack of the half-orc female assassin made Evil Hoof's scalp tingle. His solid demonic skin and thick hair could not resist Garona's fierce consecutive slashes at all. In a moment, Evil Hoof's back was already a blur. Evil Hoof tried to retreat to avoid being attacked from the front and back, but Garona's swift kick almost made him stumble and fall to the ground. At this time, a little imp that was obviously bigger than the other little imps jumped out. Duque narrowed his eyes and focused on this big imp. Kirik. Evil Hoof's closest combat partner. As a capable helper of Evil Hoof, Kilrik was definitely not someone to be trifled with. Unfortunately, he had encountered Duke. He had just been summoned, and before he could figure out what was going on, he was sent flying by a huge and illusory palm. Chapter 107. Low-level magic couldn't hurt high-level mysterious beings. It was just like how a person would be fine if they were drenched in water, but it would be terrible if they were hit by a stone. Duque was very clear about his limits. He didn't know if Khadgar, who was a mage apprentice, had encountered Tristan Ilhoof in the game's history. He only knew that if he didn't use some skills, he would be completely useless in a battle of this level, just like the priest just now. After the battle with the orc warlock, Duque had already figured out one thing: for the sparse arcane energy of low-level mages, powerful mages who used magic often had very good resistance. They didn't even need to do anything, and the highly concentrated magic in their bodies would automatically disperse the magic attacks of low-level mages. Physical damage was different. Unless it was a boss with a huge body, such as a giant dragon or a large demon, very few were not afraid of physical damage. Kilrik was definitely a big guy to other inferior demons, but in front of humans, it was only the size of a 2-year-old baby, just above Lothar's knees. As a support-type demon, Kilrik's strength was in magic attacks, not defense. In the end, it was hit. Arcane Impact, a classic arcane spell. Every time arcane impact was cast, the damage caused by all arcane spells would increase by 15 to 978%, and the mana consumption of arcane impact would also increase by 200%. This effect could be stacked up to a maximum of many times, or it would disappear after casting any damage spell other than arcane impact. When Duque first came into contact with this spell after his transmigration, he didn't feel anything. Because once this spell was stacked up, it would consume a lot of mana, which was extremely disadvantageous for a protracted battle. But when Duque was stuck at the threshold of a sky mage, he looked at this spell again, and it was like he had found a treasure. As a special mage with Arcane Fire Circuit, Duque didn't have to worry about the lack of mana among those of the same level, but he was extremely lacking in high attack power. The vast amount of mana gave Duque the capital to play around. In the eyes of others, stacking arcane impact 3 times was already unbearable, and any more would be the rhythm of draining one's mana pool. So in most spell books, there was such a note, maximum of 4 stacks. This logic did not apply to Duque. Duque's spellcasting was almost separate. He would allocate enough mana and let the system elf control the magic missile, while Duque himself had been secretly stacking arcane impact. When Kilrick appeared, what awaited him was a 7-layered arcane impact. Just the power of this spell was enough to drain a genuine level 9 earth mage dry. Duque. TSK. Drizzle. After being compressed, and compressed again, the arcana technique's density had already surpassed that of an incorporeal body, appearing in front of everyone's eyes. If someone were to stab it with a sword, the sword would most likely be broken. Duque was able to take advantage of this powerful arcana technique attack. It was too much of a waste to just use an arcane technique. Therefore, what Siahe, Lothar, and Garona saw was that after the little demon was hit by a dazzling purplish-blue arcana technique attack, the terrifying arcana technique did not dissipate. Instead, the dissipating energy condensed again under the control of Duque's mental strength. A huge arcana technique palm that was as tall as a human appeared. Like a huge palm, it slammed onto Kilrick's head with the force of a mountain. Bam! It was a tremor that shook the entire huge room. The helper that Siahe had painstakingly recruited was instantly killed by Duque's 2 consecutive attacks. Looking at Kilrick, who had turned from a little demon to a demon paste and then disintegrated into illusory evil energy and dissipated, Lothar actually had the leisure to stick out his tongue. At first, Lothar and Garona did not know why Duque would use such a powerful attack on an inconspicuous little demon. After a blink of an eye, they understood. This huge satyr that was not to be trifled with was showing a state of weakness that they had never seen before. His speed, strength, mental strength, and reflexes had all dropped significantly. Lothar could even feel from the feeling of the longsword stabbing into Siahe's body that the defense of Siahe's skin and muscles had plummeted. Good job, Duque. Lothar whistled happily. After easily blocking Siahe's machete with his shield, Lothar suddenly slashed his sword across Siahe's neck. The sword that carried some kind of divine power cut through a quarter of Siahe's neck like a piece of white paper. The cut was so big that even the naked eye could see it clearly. Purple blood spurted out in large mouthfuls, like ketchup being sold cheaply. If Siahe was a human, this attack would have been enough to kill him. The body of a demon could never be measured by human standards. Perhaps realizing the power of the sword in Lothar's hand, Siahe actually endured more attacks on other parts of his body and covered his wound with his left claw to reduce blood loss. Seeing that victory was in sight, Lothar and Garona both stepped up their attacks. At this moment, even Duque joined the siege of Siahe. Lothar and Garona were very unfamiliar with the cooperation with mages. They could tell each other's position with the naked eye, so they simply separated and attacked Siahe without affecting each other. Mages, even Lothar had never worked with mages, not to mention Garona, who was rarely seen by mages. Didn't they say that there was a Mediv? Come on, when the Mediv really took action, Lothar wouldn't have anything to do. The other pharaoh were mostly arrogant, and you could only see the nostrils of the pharaoh, let alone talk about cooperation. For a moment, Lothar shuddered. He didn't know how to cooperate with Duque. It must be noted that this was also the first time that he and Garona had truly worked together. He was the distraction, and Garona was the main attacker. Plus Duque. Magic didn't have eyes. A few seconds later, Lothar, however, was relieved. Duque was so impressive that he didn't look like a newbie who had been exposed to magic for less than a year. Not to mention earth mages, it was likely that most sky mages wouldn't be able to use magic at the same level as Duque. Lothar was the distraction from the front, and Garona was the backstab, but Duque couldn't keep up with Garona's wild movements. It could be said that there was almost no gap on the entire ground for Duque to attack. In Lothar's opinion, the only way to find him was to pass by him in a heartbeat. Unexpectedly, Duque played a bomb. Chapter 108. A huge purplish-blue energy ball floated less than 2 meters above Evil Hoof's head. Duque didn't attack casually. Once Evil Hoof attacked Lothar, a powerful arcane impact would hit Evil Hoof's head the moment Lothar raised his shield. Usually, Duque would ask the lesser demons to stack the arcane impact appropriately. Basically, the number of arcane impact layers was maintained at around 5 to 7. When Evil Hoof summoned Kill Rick again and was killed by Duque's arcane energy hand, Evil Hoof finally realized that it was his end. No! After Garona's gorgeous dagger combo finally hurt Zephy's eyeballs, Noxus found an opportunity. The blade glowing with a mysterious golden light accurately pierced into Zephy's heart and twisted. Back off! Lothar and Garona heard Dukes shout at the same time. Both of them jumped back, causing Evil Hoof's claw, which had suddenly grown bigger, to miss. Only then did Noxus realize that a dozen or so hands of magic had appeared in the air, and each of them was condensed with a fireball the size of a human head. Almost at the same time Lothar and Garona jumped back. Dense crimson fireballs rained down like a meteor shower, bombarding Evil Hoof's body. Evil Hoof, whose vitality had been greatly reduced, could no longer condense more mana to resist Duque's fireballs. This caused the flames of the fireballs to converge like a pillar of fire. A small but very intricate fire tornado appeared in the middle of the room. Not only was it burning and tearing Evil Hoof's body, but it was also so hot that the marble floor seemed to be melting. Ah! Evil Hoof let out a final scream in the flames. Evil Hoof was dead. His entire body was burned from the inside out by the flames from hell. The stinky demonic energy spread everywhere. Most of it was burned by Duque's flames, but a little bit leaked out. The room was filled with a faint stench. With Evil Hoof's death, the teleportation gate that sent the lesser demons here also lost its support and disappeared. The lively room fell into silence for a moment, leaving only the heavy breathing of the crowd. This level of battle was nothing to Noxus. He tilted his head and looked around, only to find that none of his subordinates had fallen to the ground. It was definitely a good thing that no one had died. Being mentally prepared to sacrifice oneself and actually having someone sacrifice themselves were two different things. Without saying anything, Lothar gave Duque and Garona a thumbs up. The difference in their combat strength had been completely reflected in the battle just now. Lothar and Garona were clearly in the first tier. Other than the two of them, the only one who could help was probably Duque. The rest of the people, including the priest, were to deal with the small fries. Duque covered his nose and said in a low voice, "Everyone, go out for a while. I need to collect the spoils of war." Spoils of war? Noxus was slightly taken aback. Indeed, it was only right and proper for the victors to obtain the spoils of war. However, most of the things that could be obtained on the battlefield were swords and personal items, or the enemy's flag as one's own glory. There wouldn't be too many actual good things. Now that they had killed a mid-level satyr, Duque was actually saying that it was a spoil of war. Lothar was really a little curious. There had never been any demons near Stormwind City. If killing evil creatures like demons could not only bring glory but also benefits, it might be a highlight. For some reason, Lothar had a deep feeling that there would probably be more and more demons. The more he knew about demons, the easier it would be to deal with them in the future. On the other side, Duque began to give orders to the system elf. Scan the spoils of war for anything with strong magic energy. Yes, host. After a short few seconds, the system elf gave guidance. 10 steps to the west, the bookshelf with 3 magic books with red covers, the 3rd floor, the 5th book from the left, open. Seeing Duque's actions, Garona tilted her head curiously, while Lothar was simply dumbfounded. He had never seen Duque with such sparkling eyes. This guy was clearly rich, and if he claimed to be the 2nd richest person in Stormwind City, no one would dare to claim to be the 1st. However, it was precisely this existence that had an undisguised ecstasy on his face at this moment. He was like a miser who had found a gold mine. On one side, he was almost crazy, and at the same time, he was absolutely unwilling to share it with others. I'm not a black hand. I'm not a black hand. Muttering words that Lothar and Garona would never understand, Duque drifted to the left like a ghost. Black hand? Garona tilted her head, puzzled. Why did he say the name of the orc chief? But she did not know that this black hand was not the black hand that he was referring to. Duque really wanted to find something to wash his hands with, like a bath or incense. Although Duque didn't believe in metaphysics, as a former commander of World of Warcraft who had cleared the Molten Core instance dungeon in 1 week and made a warlock and a druid graduate with full equipment, Duque didn't believe that his hands were that lucky. Ugh, Lothar, can you do me a favor? Having killed a powerful demon, Lothar was in a good mood. With a bright smile, he said, with pleasure. Duque pointed at the huge magic book and said, there's something in here. If I touch it, I'm afraid that I'll turn black. I'm afraid that I'll be stained with evil presence. It'll be great if you can use your sword to open this magic book. It was definitely a strange request. If it were someone else, Lothar would definitely suspect that this guy was tricking him. But Duque. Lothar could clearly sense Duque's dilemma. With a smile, he gently pierced the bottom of the big book with his gorgeous longsword and flicked it up. The whole big book flew out just like that. The big book, which weighed at least 5 kilograms, fell to the ground with a loud crash. To his surprise, the unrestrained pages didn't open. The pages were all stuck together as if they were glued. Noxus frowned slightly. He subconsciously protected half of his body with a shield, and then the sharp blade pierced through the pages. Hiss, with a sound, Duque's heart lurched. Damn it, there really is an evil presence. However, the demonic power left by the evil hooves was a big problem for Duque. It was a piece of cake for Lothar. Under the dispelling of the godly power of the sword that Duque secretly called the King's Sword, the small demonic power was instantly swept away. The book opened, revealing a hollowed-out inside. Inside was a cloth belt and a strange ornament. Duque couldn't help but feel delighted. Chapter 109. The Azeroth of this moment was far from the situation of magic equipment in the future. When he had money after transmigrating, Duque had always been thinking about getting a set of magic equipment, but having money was useless. He didn't know if the real world of Azeroth had inherited the principle of binding to pick up in the game. Duque couldn't find any good equipment even after asking people all over the world. As a result, Duque didn't even have a decent piece of equipment. No staff, no equipment, just a set of beginner's robes from the Wang family's mage guild. This was the real world, so there shouldn't be things like soul binding or level limits in the game. Just in case, Duque didn't dare to have too much hope and touched the 2 items. The system notification popped up almost at the same time. Fiend's Waste, this is a mage belt of unknown origin, surging with strange mysterious energy. Obviously, it will slightly increase the power of your arcane circuit. However, this is a piece of equipment that can only be used by high-grade sky mages, so you can probably get a 20% increase now. Accessory, capacitor, this is a magical magic item that connects to an elemental world full of lightning. It will collect your arcane energy pulse, and only the most explosive pulse can activate it and make it work. After you have accumulated 3 powerful pulses, it will automatically open the door to the elemental world for you, releasing a bolt of lightning to attack your current target. Hiss. Duque still took a deep breath. It wasn't a shock, but a pleasant surprise. First, it was a piece of equipment that was definitely a mid to high level item in the game, but he could actually use it at such a low level. This made Duque completely change his mind about Karazhan. Originally, Duque didn't expect to use Karazhan's equipment. After all, he was too low level. And these bosses in Karazhan, in the original history, only appeared in the middle of the game. The second was the appearance of Capacitor. As a transmigrator, Duque immediately realized the value of this thing. The explosive pulse could be understood as critical damage. Generally speaking, it wasn't easy to stack critical hits. Duque was definitely a special case, because he had the ability to cast multiple spells that most mages did not have. More than 100 hands of magic launched attacks at the same time. Even the simplest arcane missile often had a critical hit on the damage assessment given by the system elves. It could be said that the Capacitor was a top-quality item for Duke. If Lothar was Aurelia, Duque would definitely hug him to see if they could have a little flirting. Unfortunately, bearded Uncle Lothar, forget it. Duque didn't hide his ecstasy, and Lothar also smiled. Good stuff. It didn't look like a demon, so it should be the relic of an unknown mage. I'm sure that mage would be very happy to be able to make good use of these things. Duque didn't act pretentious and immediately used what he needed. There was a small pin on the Capacitor, and Duque first pinned it to the Fiend Girdle, before putting on the belt. Almost as soon as the belt was fastened, Duque felt the magic circuit in his body change. It was a very mysterious feeling. The original arcane fire circuit had already become a large, circular river. Now it felt like a new tributary had flowed into it. If magic power was described as water, then Duque's water volume had increased by at least 20%. This was a terrifying number. Duque couldn't help but exclaim in his heart, this equipment from Karazhan, even if it's not complete, is still a huge improvement for me. At this time, Garona also came up. Did you sense anything I can use? Duque looked a little embarrassed. Sorry, no. Evil Hoof is not an agile monster, I don't think there are many things suitable for you. I see. Garona shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. Half-beastmen were so simple and direct. She had contributed to the battle, and if there was something suitable, she definitely wanted a share. But if there was nothing suitable, she didn't mind. Garona wiped the blood on the dagger with Evil Hoof's unstained fur. Okay, how do we go now? Duque touched his chin and pondered. It was a good thing to encounter Evil Hoof as soon as he came in, because it proved that his raid team had bypassed a lot of bosses at the front gate of Karazhan. But as for what to do next, he would have to think carefully. However, Duque looked at Lothar. Lothar shrugged. Don't look at me, I did come here with Lang many times before, but we always walked in from the main entrance. We usually chatted near the opera house and watched the performances. We had never entered such a deep place before. Besides, I haven't been to the first half of Karazhan for almost 10 years. The last few times I came, I sat on the griffin and landed on the high platform. Then, Medivh opened a small portal for me, and I stepped into his study. Duque suddenly understood. He suddenly understood why there was an opera house when he played Karazhan in the game before. That was the opera house that Lang often visited Medivh with Lothar and a group of nobles when he was young. Medivh specially designed the opera house in the Mage Tower to welcome Lang. Of course, if this was the standard version of Karazhan, Duque would not get lost even with his eyes closed. But Karazhan with space disorder was a bit troublesome. Duque decided. Let's go out first. Generally speaking, going higher is the right thing to do. Okay. Lothar had no objections, and his men and Garona had no objections either. Just then, a powerful and evil will suddenly connected to the huge room. If it weren't for the huge blood-red fog that enveloped the room itself, Lothar and the others even suspected that the terrifying will would directly descend into the room. Tristan, what the hell are you doing? Why is my eyes telling me that there's a battle here? Even though the tone of the voice were completely different, Lothar immediately recognized that it was Mediva's voice. Of course, it was Sargeras who spoke. Oh no. We're going to be exposed. Even though they were very unwilling, Lothar and his men still put on a fighting stance and prepared for battle. But, before seeing Mediv, was there any use in preparing for battle? Just when everyone was sweating, Duque spoke. He pinched his throat, and the voice that came out of his mouth was Tristan's. Sorry, master, it's Gilric teaching a few disobedient bastards a lesson. Chapter 110. It was exactly the same voice, and even the aristocratic manner of speaking and accent had been imitated. Lothar and Garona, who were beside Duque, looked like they had seen a ghost. If it weren't for the fact that the sword in their hands didn't show any signs of Duque being possessed by a demon, Lothar would have slashed him. Although they couldn't see Sargeras's expression, Sargeras clearly wasn't interested in the trivial matter of a middle-ranked demon teaching a low-ranked demon a lesson. Demons themselves were also divided into different ranks. Low-ranked demons such as imps and inferior demons were even worse than cannon fodder in front of their boss, Sargeras. Humph, Sargeras, who was busy every day, snorted coldly, and then his will retreated. Lothar, Garona, and Duque looked at each other. Duque suddenly sighed to Lothar. Fortunately, you weren't impulsive. Lothar curled his lips. I should be the one saying that to you. I've lived for more than 40 years, and I'm long past the age of impulsiveness. If impulsiveness and sacrifice can solve the problem, of course I don't mind. But I'm not only the kingdom's military commander, but I also shoulder the hopes of Lang and the entire kingdom's people. Before I see Mediv, I won't expose myself. Garona was curious about Duque's voice change. How did you change your voice? Duque rolled his eyes and argued. If you know, then you're a mage. What should he say? That the system elf helped him complete the temporary voice change. That was nonsense. Since there was no way to explain it, he might as well push it to the realm of mystery. The assault team returned to their marching formation. Garona explored the way in front, while Lothar protected Duque as he moved forward. After entering the back door of Karazhan, the space was chaotic. Many times, there was no path at all, only a teleportation portal that emitted an illusory light. One could only judge whether to go in or not by the faint aura coming from the other side of the portal. Moreover, most portals were one way. However, Duque relied on the system elf and didn't go the wrong way. Even Lothar was surprised. Because he also found that his team should be moving higher and higher in Karazhan. Duque, how did you do it? You discovered the pattern of the portal? No, I judged it based on the humidity of the air, the dust, and the density of magic power. The density of the magic power. Noxus pondered. In fact, Duque was also talking nonsense. Being rich in mana was the most unreliable factor in Karazhan. Because this place was connected to the astral world, there were all kinds of astral world creatures. This kind of spatial rift that crossed worlds was completely unpredictable. He still relied on the Karazhan in his memory, and then let the system elf simulate and compare the nearby environment. Although there were still times when he was wrong, most of the time his choice was correct. However, Duque's appearance had turned many terrifying risks into controllable ones. Astral flare, a high-energy spherical object that shines with light. If it weren't for Duque, the team would have suffered a shocking number of casualties. Because this thing would self-destruct. As a veteran, No, a veteran player, Duque immediately associated this thing with the annoying monster in his memory. He turned an arcane impact into a palm and hit the incoming astral flare away. Seeing the astral flare explode violently, Noxus was tongue-tied. Are you sure this thing won't alarm Medivh? Duque tilted his head. No, there's a huge astral rift here. Flare explosions happen every day. Here, even if you bring a few hundred people to a party, Medivh won't care. Another example was the ethereal thief. This monster was very unfriendly to melee professions. Although it had a human form wrapped in bandages, it was an unmistakable astral world creature in its bones. They could create a distorted space, temporarily taking away a person's strength and reducing their agility. After only staying in the spatial distortion for a dozen seconds, Noxus's face was already pale. When Duque used an instant pyroblast to teach the ethereal thief a lesson, Noxus's weak legs instantly regained their strength. After who knew how long, Duque and the others arrived outside a huge library. Duque frowned. He knew which boss was inside. You stay outside. I'll talk to that person inside. If it doesn't work, I'll call you in. But it'd be best if Noxus and Garona come in. After all, other people will only be a burden. You know who's inside? Noxus raised an eyebrow. I do. He's left a deep mark in the kingdom's history. Duke went in alone. He stayed inside for a full 10 minutes, but there was no sound of movement. 10 minutes later, Duque came out calmly. Let's go. We avoided a battle. Noxus asked tentatively, is there anything we need to know? Yes, we might have reinforcements. You convinced the guy inside? Sort of. Along the way, Duque and the others arrived at a huge hall. There were many arcades and tall marble pillars on both sides of the hall. In the middle of the hall, on a high platform made of black and white tiles, there was a sudden flash of light. After the light disappeared, a group of figures appeared. Noxus couldn't stay calm at all. He saw his best friend and king, Lang. That Lang was so realistic that Noxus almost shouted out loud. Not only Noxus, but the elite soldiers behind Noxus also made a low commotion. However, whether it was Lang or the people around him, none of them moved. The same was true for the ferocious orcs opposite him. Of course, this was the Karazhan chess stage. Since there was already Evil Hoof and that person in front of them, Duque was not surprised at all by the appearance of Karazhan chess. It seems that we're going to play a game of chess. Duque shrugged. He walked in front of a strange human-shaped statue. Suddenly, a voice came from the statue directly into the minds of Duque, Noxus, Garona, and all the soldiers. You and your friend, are you ready to become a chess piece on the battlefield and join this battle? Duque was slightly stunned. This seemed to be different from the Karazhan chess he knew. On the other side, Noxus had already raised his head and replied, we're ready. The next moment, a white light emerged from everyone's body. In a completely conscious state, they suddenly found that their souls had been extracted and attached to the chess pieces on the black and white chessboard. The voice of the statue came again. Fight, fight, the souls of the losers will be destroyed. And the winner will receive a reward. As the voice fell, everyone's expression suddenly changed. Not only because this was a battle of souls, but also because there were so many more chess pieces on the other side. Chapter 111. When he arrived at this huge hall, Lothar already had some memories. The floor tiles and wall decorations here were very similar to Medivh's study and bedroom. Based on an intuition, he knew that Medivh wasn't far from him. As an old friend of Medivh for decades, he knew very well that there were many levels in Medivh's mage tower that could not be passed to the next level. For the kingdom, for Lang, for the people, Lothar did not hesitate at all. The current situation still made Lothar frown. The difference in military strength was too great. At some point, the chessboard had become a vast plain. Apart from the flat ground that was still filled with white and black squares, the place had expanded countless times. It felt as if he had been pulled into another world. There were at least 300 orcs in front of him. They were more burly than the orcs he had seen with his own eyes, and the surface area of their bodies was also more covered. They waved their weapons, and their mouths were full of fangs as they panted heavily, emitting a terrifying aura. Lothar's subordinates were already tough enough. On average, they were 1.9 meters tall, which would be huge men in the Seven Kingdoms. But the opposite side was even more terrifying. On average, they were 2.5 meters tall. In front of these guys, Lothar's elite soldiers could only reach their chests. Their body proportions were like that of an adult and a child. Looking at the heavy weapons that easily weighed more than 50 kilograms, Lothar's elite soldiers couldn't help but swallow their saliva. More importantly, Lothar saw more tooth ornaments on these orcs. He remembered Garona saying that only the bravest tribal warriors who had killed those recognized as powerful creatures alone were qualified to break off the fangs of those creatures and make them into ornaments to wear. Lothar saw a large number of huge fang ornaments that were longer than a human palm. How is this possible? Garona couldn't believe the scene in front of her. Black Hand, and his personal guards. Black Hand? You mean the strongest orc tribe, Great Chief Black Hand? Wait, you're Lothar? Garona's appearance hadn't changed. Before they set off, Lothar had given her a suit of fine steel armor that only the elite warriors of Stormwind City were allowed to wear. However, she had changed from infantry to cavalry. She had clearly become a horse on the chessboard. Lothar's subordinates all became chess pieces on the chessboard. His face was still his own, but his equipment was a little different. The feeling of the weapon was still the same. There were two people who changed the most. One was Lothar. Because he was wearing the golden armor of the Valang from the chessboard just now, the shining lion armor with golden threads, the symbol of the king's identity, the full golden helmet that looked like a lion's mouth, and the gold-edged white cloak behind him. Other than Lang's king's sword in his hand, this was exactly what King Lang would wear on the battlefield. This kind of rebellious attire made Lothar feel extremely uncomfortable. If Noxus was the only one who experienced such a change, he would probably die of shame. For some reason, Noxus felt much better with someone accompanying him. Duque. He was wearing a scarf made of a soft white feather collar. The scarf was connected to a long cloak that reached the ground. Dressed in a clean and dry mage robe, Duke, who had an ordinary appearance, now looked like a scholar. The most eye-catching thing was that Duque was holding something that belonged to Medivh in his right hand, the artifact that symbolized the glory of the Guardians, the staff Atish Guardian. Well, it seemed that Anduin had taken the role of Lang, and Duque had become Medivh. Duque glanced at his own attire and sighed softly. Sigh, Sir Lothar, don't mind this appearance. This is an illusion brought about by magic. It doesn't mean anything. The people here are all good soldiers loyal to you, to Stormwind, and to the world of Azeroth. No one will blame you for this. Let's focus on the next battle. At this time, an existence that made Garona's entire body and soul tremble appeared. It was an orc that didn't look tall compared to the other orcs. He was hunched and wore a loose black robe. There were a few bone spikes on his back that pointed to the sky. There were a few Draenei skulls stuck on the bone spikes. He had terrible fangs with many rotten teeth, and a pair of eyes that emitted an evil green light. Ghoul Dan. Garona said the name that was almost taboo to her with a trembling voice. Ghoul Dan is here too. Lothar raised his eyebrows and looked at the orc warlock who was dozens of steps away. Lothar had heard from Garona about the most noteworthy people among the orcs. Of course, he wouldn't forget Ghoul Dan, who was known as the most dangerous person. However, what was going on in front of him? It wasn't that the other party didn't want to fight, but that they seemed to be blocked by something. Wait a minute, this seems to be a death game with souls on the line. Of course, the other party isn't the real Blackhand Chief and the real Ghoul Dan. However, it's different from ordinary games. It seems that we can get reinforcements. Reinforcements? Lothar was stunned. Where do we get reinforcements from? Lothar wasn't the only one who was stunned. Duque was also stunned. The system actually prompted him, this is a death game with souls on the line. If you add more souls, you can have more reinforcements. This will undoubtedly increase your chances of winning. The current strength ratio is 11 to 89. Damn! This is clearly going against the wind. Isn't this forcing me to top up? Is this another stupid game where I don't have money to play? Are you kidding me? The next moment, Duque decisively slapped his own mouth. This was because he saw on the list that the system elf projected on his retina that he could use to top up. The muscles on Duque's face showed what it meant to be temperamental in just a few seconds. Actually there are reinforcements. It's just that they look a bit bad for the city. Don't mind them. As long as it's for victory, for Azeroth. Lothar was extremely magnanimous. Anyway, without you, we probably wouldn't have made it here. If you have any tricks, just use them. Just as Duque was about to summon those guys, a bright red and dazzling warning text on his retina made Duque's head hurt. Warning! Warning! The chess pieces that you've summoned are the monsters that you killed back then. They are powerful and inhumane. If you let them enter the battlefield, there's a 99% chance that they will rebel and join the enemy's camp. Damn, isn't this just throwing a rock at my penis? What's the solution? Duque almost cursed at the system elf. You just need to inject your integrity, humanity into them, and they will completely listen to your instructions in this battle. For a moment, Duque almost didn't want to top up. But he immediately felt gazes from all directions. Lothar's gaze, Garona's gaze, the elite soldier's gaze, and even the gazes of millions of humans. Duque gritted his teeth. For faith, top up. Everyone is prepared to sacrifice themselves for humanity, and I'm the only one hiding in the safety circle. Is that appropriate? Staring at the orcs opposite him, Duque's vision seemed to go beyond this strange chess space, beyond Karazhan, and beyond the whole world. If there comes a day when I fall into madness because of the loss of my soul, please destroy me with your own hands. For some reason, Duke's smile seemed so light, yet it was as heavy as a mountain. Lothar suddenly found himself choking. He patted Duque's shoulder with one hand. Okay. If there comes a day, I will do it myself. But if I am lucky enough to return to Stormwind, I will spend the rest of my life sculpting a huge statue for you that the whole country can see, in the King's Valley. This was a man's promise, this was a hero's promise. Duque suddenly found that he had completely gained the approval of this epic hero, Anduin Lothar. With a faint smile on his face, Duque turned his head. Let's take care of these guys first. The combat power of the two sides had changed because of Duque's soul charge. Duque used 5% of his moral integrity as the price in exchange for an increase in combat power. From the initial overwhelming disadvantage, the two sides' combat power was 45 to 55. And this was just a simple increase in numbers. Duque could not expect these guys he killed to perform well. Noel Hogg and his little brother, the gray-scaled Naga Siren Priest, a group of male Nagas, and more than 1,000 unreliable Murlocs. Such a combination of land and sea was extremely unreliable. Not only Duque saw it, but Lothar also saw it. Duque, are these guys under your control? Yes. I plan to let the Murlocs attack from the right side first, and then the Gnolls from the left. Lothar was a man who knew his soldiers well. He immediately understood Duque's plan, drag the left and right, then break through in the middle and give the opponent a fatal blow. Good idea. Yes, this damn game of death ends with the death of the opponent's general. On the black and white tiles, the Murlocs took their seemingly ridiculous steps and charged under the whips of the Nagas. The whole battlefield was filled with murlocs, and even they themselves might not understand the meaning of their cries. They formed a black mass and swept towards the orcs like a huge wave. On the surface, they seemed to have the momentum to drown the orc army in one breath. However, that was just what it looked like. The orcs standing at the front formed a green wall. The murlocs at the front handed out their rough spears to the orc army. If there was no accident, they would pierce the chest of the orc in front in 3 seconds. Unfortunately, there was no lack of accidents in the world. They crashed into a wall of death made of heavy weapons. It was as if they had really crashed into an invisible wall. The giant hammers and axes that came smashing down on their heads easily smashed their crude weapons and their laughable fish-shaped heads into smithereens. This terrible destructive power made the impact of the entire murloc stagnate. The murlocs at the front who saw this scene tried to retreat, and the murlocs at the back who did not know the reason continued to rush forward, squeezing the space of their companions. Ha ha ha! Bastard murlocs! Die! Die! The berserk great chieftain's forbidden guards opened their mouths, which were filled with bloody veins and fangs. They let out earth-shattering roars as they attacked while chopping melons and vegetables. Often, each swing could smash multiple murlocs into meat paste or split them into several pieces. The murlocs were obviously stunned by the wild attack of the other party. Chaos spread rapidly, hundreds of murlocs collided in the center of the battlefield, and for a moment it was a pot of porridge. If it was not for the scolding of the Nagas behind, maybe the murlocs would have collapsed. Chapter 113. Lothar and his soldiers frowned at this pig-like teammate. It was worse than a farmer with a pitchfork who had no combat experience at all. If they didn't know that this was Duque's cannon fodder, they would probably be cursing. 2 minutes later, the situation changed again. The orcs' formation was in chaos. After the orcs drank the demon's blood, every green-skinned orc had extremely wild genes in their bodies. Even though this was a simulation brought by the chess checkpoint, it reflected this fact. After a short confrontation, the guards of the great chief brandished their heavy weapons and charged into the murlocs. However, when they were ready to kill, they encountered the gray-scaled Nagas. The male gray-scaled Nagas were not high-level soldiers, but they relied on their strong muscles and better weapons that were not inferior to the orcs. Although they were still at a disadvantage, they succeeded in attracting the attention of the orcs. At this time, under Duque's mind control, Hogg, who had died tragically in Duque's hands, led his underlings to attack from the left. Duque suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of joy. Because of the addition of the demon's power, Hogg and his underlings, who had almost taught Duque how to be a human, all grew bigger and became so burly. Now, when the system prompted that Hogg's soul could be inserted, Duque was a little worried. He didn't know if this was a trash version of the Gnoll without the demon's power. One had to know that the original Gnoll was less than a meter tall. This kind of body size was really worse than whack-a-mole against the orcs. Fortunately, Duque had an enhanced version of Hogg, and the soul he had invested was also an enhanced version. These Gnolls, who were more burly than the murlocs, relied on their superior agility to successfully entangle more than 100 of the great chief's guards. Even though Blackhand's direct subordinates were stronger, they couldn't gain the upper hand for a while. Lothar and Duque looked at each other. As the saying goes, great minds think alike. They knew that the opportunity had come. For glory. Charge! Lothar waved the king's sword and charged. Male lions rarely participated in hunting. Most of the time, the task of hunting for the lions fell to the lionesses. Very few people knew that when a lion that was lazy all day attacked, its aura was so terrifying. Lothar's charge wasn't fast. He was like an arrow that had just left the bow. However, Lothar's charge gave off an unstoppable feeling that the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. The heavy and firm footsteps were sonorous and forceful. His naturally wavy hair was like a lion's mane in the strong wind, giving people an explosive sense of beauty. It was getting closer and closer. Noxus could clearly see every single strand of hair on the face of the Orc Imperial Guard. He was panting heavily, and every single tooth on his mouth was so unconventional. He even vaguely felt that he could smell the foul breath of the orcs' mouths. Ha! Lothar leaped forward like a lion pouncing on its prey. He raised his shield and charged into the middle of the Orc Royal Guards. At that moment, in the eyes of the elite soldiers who were charging with Lothar, their beloved Sir Lothar seemed to be the incarnation of the god of war and the symbol of invincibility. Following Lothar's back and looking at the cloak embroidered with the emblem of Stormwind on Lothar's back, they felt like they were fighting with the god of victory. A surge of hot blood surged into their hearts, causing every corner of the warriors' bodies to boil. In the blink of an eye, Lothar had already killed 3 Orc Royal Guards. Their extremely swift counterattack in the eyes of outsiders was as laughable as clowns in slow motion in Lothar's eyes. Thrusting the sword, drawing the sword, and the fatal attack were completed in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint. The weaker warriors couldn't even see how Lothar cut the orc's throat with the blade of his longsword. If Lothar's attack was still traceable, Garona's attack was even more strange and swift. No one could see how Garona attacked. The appearance of this female half-orc, who was petite compared to the orcs, was bound to be accompanied by the scene of several orcs covering their vitals and falling to the ground with blood gushing out of their fingers. The combination of Lothar and Garona was the most dazzling flag in the eyes of the warriors of Stormwind. No, there was another dazzling flag, Duque. 36 hands of magic appeared out of thin air, and shining arcane missiles tore through the void and poured down like a storm on the Orc Royal Guards who were trying to surround and annihilate Lothar. Not only the missiles, but there was also an endless stream of lightning. The frequency of the lightning was so high that it almost made people forget whether Duque was using arcane missiles or thunderbolt. Duque's magic skills were so superb that he even used dazzling spells to shoot down Ghoul Dan's rain of fire that was trying to hit Lothar. The collision of arcane spells, lightning, and flames formed a magnificent scene in the sky above the battlefield. Duque's extremely accurate cover made Lothar remember that there was only one chance. Once they were surrounded, the humans at a disadvantage would only be drowned in the raging sea of orcs and face destruction in despair. The performance of the 3 made the elites of Stormwind almost forget time and space, and subconsciously locked their eyes on the 3 of them. They only came back to their senses when the first orc warrior who was struck let out a pained wail. They focused all their attention on this battle where their lives and souls were on the line. For some reason, there was a burning passion in the chests of the warriors. They couldn't wait to end this battle with victory, and then tell the heroic deeds of these 3 legends to their comrades, relatives, and everyone who paid attention to the world of Azeroth. Lothar pulled out his long sword, and the last Orc Royal Guard in front of him let out an angry and desperate scream. When the burly body that was like a wall collapsed, there was no longer any barrier between Lothar and the great chief's black hand. The battlefield instantly fell silent. Another tall and burly orc with reddish-brown skin with explosive muscles appeared. He raised his huge war hammer high and waved it at Garona. King against king. General against general. Traitor Garona, your opponent is me, Orgrim Doomhammer. Beside him, Ghoul Dan leaned on the infamous skull staff and pointed at Duque from afar. Kid, your opponent is me, Ghoul Dan. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank, and the breath in his chest seemed to carry a certain excitement. He didn't know what the situation in this chest space would be like. He only knew that in this group of people, only he could fight against Ghoul Dan. Come. Chapter 114. Stormwind City's night sky was as calm as ever. The darkness of the night came as usual, just like how people always believed that the light of dawn would always come every day. In the dark night, crimson flames constantly shone through the fog in the distance, declaring destruction and terror to Stormwind City, an enclave that hung alone outside of the human political center of the entire continent. To the west of Stormwind City, the sea that had not changed since the last descendants of Thoradin the Great arrived 1,000 years ago shone with starlight. With the clear moonlight hanging over the sea, one could vaguely see that Stormwind Port, which had been dark once night fell a year ago, was now brightly lit and filled with sails and masts. Other than the sound of the rolling waves, there were also the voices of people coming from afar. Looking at Stormwind Port, King Lang suddenly sighed to the Queen. "My dear, I've been thinking about a question. Is Duke Marcus our kingdom's destined guardian? If you look at the current situation, it's obvious that he is." "That's right." The Queen gently tightened her grip on Lang's arm. Without his Stormwind Port, Stormwind City might have already started to collapse. Before the orcs came, everyone thought that the new Stormwind Port that Duque built was just a useful supplement to Stormwind City's revenue. As the war progressed, everyone realized that Stormwind Port and Duque's fleet actually controlled the kingdom's fate, becoming its pulse. Stormwind City was located in the south of the continent. With all the roads to the north blocked by the orcs, the sea became Stormwind City's only lifeline to the outside world. In this era, entering the port at night was extremely dangerous. But in order to transport the military supplies that Stormwind City lacked, the old captains of Stormwind City and the maritime kingdom of Kul Tiras not only transported during the day, but also to save space in the port and increase the transport capacity, they even chose to enter the port at dusk, unload the goods overnight, and leave at midnight. With the efforts of a group of captains and sailors, all kinds of supplies were continuously transported from the other human kingdoms and the dwarves' iron furnace castle. Women and children who needed to be evacuated were transported ahead of time, all the way north across the sea to South Shore. Since the 7 human kingdoms had yet to come up with a unified opinion on the orcs' invasion, the aid given to Stormwind City at this stage could basically be regarded as civilian assistance. Most of the nobles in the north scoffed at what Lang's messenger said about the orcs' large-scale invasion and how great the harm would be. "What's the big deal about orcs? We've been killing the trolls here for thousands of years, but we still haven't killed them all." This was the opinion of most of the nobles. They expressed the most malicious suspicions and speculations regarding the fall of half of Storm City. The only fortunate thing was that the Alterac Kingdom agreed to lend South Shore to settle the refugees from Stormwind. As for the other 6 kingdoms, they allowed Lang's proposal to purchase supplies, allowing the people of Stormwind City to purchase all kinds of military supplies and fiercely cracking down on the illegal merchants who inflated prices. At the same time, Lang was allowed to send people to recruit volunteers and mercenaries from the 6 kingdoms. However, this was not enough. Only Lang, who was facing the orc rampage head-on, knew that this would require the 7 kingdoms to declare an all-out war at the same time, gathering the 7 kingdoms, as well as the dwarves and the elves as allies, before it would be enough. As soon as he thought of this, Lang felt a wave of suffocation in his heart. So far, everything that Duke had offered, every idea that he had offered, had been good. For example, a new type of blockhouse. That was something that Duque left behind, a fellow called Makarov, was in charge of. It had a strange name, cement. As for how this thing was made, Makarov was tight-lipped. Even Makarov himself said that it was only a half-finished product. The effect was obvious. The newly designed hexagonal blockhouse was very good at delaying the orcs' offensive. This blockhouse was about 3 stories high, made from this cement, mixed with stones and sand, and in a short 2 to 3 days, it became extremely sturdy. Under the command of an unknown member of the Mason Brotherhood, Edwin Van Cleef, Duque's personally appointed name, in the outskirts of Gold's Hire, one of the barriers of Stormwind City, no less than 500 of these blockhouses were built in just a few days. Even the largest orc catapults could not easily destroy this kind of blockhouse. The narrow shooting holes made it so that the orcs could not even reach in. A large number of Duque's trained javelin throwers hid in these blockhouses, and from various shooting holes, they gave the orcs a heavy counterattack. When the orcs used the cruelest and most brutal way to destroy the blockhouse, the harpooneers could use the tunnel that they had dug beforehand to drill into the next blockhouse through a tunnel that was so narrow that only humans could pass through, and continue to kill the orcs. There were even stories of some outstanding javelin throwers achieving great feats that even the bravest of Stormwind City warriors couldn't do. That guy killed 36 strong orc warriors by himself, and left a mark on the orc's forehead with a javelin mark, which became the best proof of this feat. What made Lang not know whether to laugh or cry was that Stormwind had an additional army, the Murlocs. These abominable monsters that once caused incomparable headaches for the residents of the Elven Forest had now become the guardians of the people of Stormwind. The Murlocs let out inexplicable, cackling sounds, and occupied almost every river in the Elven Forest that was more than 5 meters wide. Any orc who dared to go to the river to get water would be baptized by the Murlocs' crude javelins. Everything that Duque did had greatly helped the whole of Stormwind. Recalling the changes that Duque had made to the kingdom, Lang was deeply moved. I wonder how his and Anduin's raid is going. I hope they can come back safely. It's okay. If they were killed, I think Sargeras would be the first to come and show off. The queen comforted Lang gently. Lang suddenly smiled bitterly. Nearly 1,000 years ago, my ancestors came to Stormwind City, cut their way through brambles, and started a magnificent era for the people. No matter what, I don't want Stormwind City to be destroyed in my hands. You won't. Instead of thinking about this, why don't you think about how you will reward them for their achievements if they return in triumph? How about erecting a statue for them in the King's Valley? Good idea. At this moment, Duque, whom Lang and the entire upper echelons of Stormwind had placed high hopes on. He was facing the most dangerous battle since his transmigration. Because his opponent was Ghoul Dan, even if this was just a fictional Ghoul Dan created by some unknown magical principle. In this strange chess space, Ghoul Dan was still incomparably powerful. Breathing in the slightly cold air, Duque felt the smell of blood and dry heat in his nose. He couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, telling himself that he was writing a legend that belonged only to him at this moment. Chapter 115. Duque raised his head and glanced upwards. In this chess space, time and space had already disappeared. Through the battlefield that was filled with swords and blades, there was only an endless black and white grid in the distance, while the sky was empty. The only thing he could pay attention to was his opponent. On the other side, Lothar was fighting Blackhand to the death. It was not an easy task. The orcs could afford to drag it out, but the humans couldn't. Once the Murlocs and Gnolls retreated, it would be the end of the humans. Anduin had no choice but to attack. That was definitely good news for the orc chief who preferred to fight head-on. The huge hammer was heavy and swift. Blackhand's arm strength was beyond human imagination, and the violent wind pressure that seemed to cause a small mountain to collapse every time he swung the hammer made Lothar feel suffocated. However, Blackhand's movements were so fast that every swing of his hammer seemed like an illusion. Lothar was caught off guard, and was forced to clash with the hammer and sword. Lothar was almost killed instantly. A longsword was a light weapon, and compared to a heavy weapon like a hammer, it was not very durable. Besides, Blackhand's sledgehammer was specialized. It weighed more than 300 kilograms. Almost at the instant of the clash, Lothar was already cursing himself in his heart. Why did he have to fight with this monster whose strength was comparable to that of the legendary giants? This was because this hammer strike had almost broken his king's sword. Although the long sword in Lothar's hand was a light weapon, it had actually inherited the will of Thoradin the Great, and was filled with the desire for freedom and survival of countless ancestors. The king's sword had already surpassed the epic level, and was close to the level of an artifact. Although the blade of the sword was thin and slender compared to Blackhand's hammer, it was something that would break easily. In terms of hardness and tenacity. Well, Lothar still remembered how he used to poke holes in the marble with the king's sword when he was young. However, when such a semi-divine sword clashed with Blackhand's hammer, it still produced a muffled groan that went straight to Lothar's soul. Even if it wasn't to the extent of the groan, it still made Lothar give up on the idea of a quick victory. Lothar glanced at Garona from the corner of his eyes. The ferocious female orc was currently beating up Blackhand's aide-de-camp, or Grim. It seemed that Garona had the upper hand. Garona's figure flickered as she used the cold gleam of her dagger to slash at the spots where Orgrim's flesh had been exposed. If Orgrim was a human, even if his vitals weren't severely injured, he would still die from excessive blood loss. It was a pity that the vitality of the orcs could not be measured by human standards. Besides, it was obvious that he was not a real living orc. Orgrim's ferocity did not diminish at all. Rather, Lothar was more concerned about Garona. Thieves had a natural disadvantage against warriors. The offensive seemed fierce, but if the warrior's counterattack succeeded, the thief would be defeated. Warriors were thick-skinned and had countless opportunities to make mistakes. Thieves, on the other hand, could lose their lives if they made a single mistake. Of course, Lothar was most worried about Duque. Duque gave Lothar a strange feeling. His aura was that of an earth rank, but his attacks felt like that of a sky wizard. Alright, let's say that Duque was the same as his master, hiding his strength. However, Gul'-Dan gave Lothar the feeling that Gul'-Dan's strength was comparable to Mediva's. Even if the strength of Gul'-Dan's image was greatly reduced. Duque would have to face an opponent that was at least at the Morning Star rank. How long could Duque last? Lothar could not help but feel anxious. Duque was indeed in huge trouble. Gul'-Dan's strength was ridiculously high. The system genie was already sending out all sorts of warnings on Duque's vision. Duque could not help but curse the system genie. I'm courting death by challenging Gul'-Dan's image, stop giving me more warnings. Only then did the system genie calm down. Low-level magic was destined to be unable to shake a higher-level mysterious force. From the very beginning, Duque had known. If not for the capacitor that he had just used, Duque would not have been able to compete with Gul'-Dan's image no matter what. That kind of crushing mana could cancel out any offensive or defensive spell cast by Duque without a trace. With the capacitor, everything was different. No matter how the chess level in Karazhan had changed. In essence, the chess level was still one of the bosses in Karazhan. If this real world also had things like item levels, then the difficulty of the capacitor level would be similar to the chess level, or even the same. This was a bug that could be exploited by Duque, allowing him to hurt Gul'-Dan in the chess space with such low strength. It was still that gorgeous and blinding barrage of arcane missiles. The swooshing sounds of the arcane bullets tearing through the air had been echoing in everybody's ears since the very beginning. The arcane missiles that were blocked by Gul'-Dan's mage shield were not the main point. The main point was the lightning effect that was triggered after the arcane missiles hit. Capacitor was an accessory that had no limit on the frequency of activation. For Duque at the moment, it was no less than a true divine artifact. All the bystanders could hear was the incessant crackling of the electric current. At first, there was only one mage hand around Duque with electricity, but later, the frequency of the lightning was too high. Everyone could only see that the entire space around Duque was filled with blinding electricity. Countless bolts of lightning shot out from Duque's vicinity, pouring towards Gul'-Dan's direction. The wriggling electric snakes let out ferocious roars and swept across the floor tiles wantonly. They even left terrifying black electric marks on the white spaces of the floor tiles. Impossible! Gul'-Dan roared angrily. He kept releasing destructive flames at Duque. Every single ball of flame, regardless of whether it was quality or quantity, Gul'-Dan had the advantage. However, every single ball of flame was destroyed by the countless lightning arrows in the air. Gul'-Dan's mirror image could not understand. Why was this happening? How could a low-rank sorcerer who could only cast weak arcane missiles be able to cast such a large number of lightning attacks that could hurt him when he was in such a weak state? He began to doubt himself. Was the human his opponent, or was it the strange accessory on his waist that was his opponent? How could this kind of brainless accessory that put the cart before the horse actually threaten him? If Gul'-Dan had real self-awareness, he would probably go crazy. Chapter 116. The scene in front of his eyes was extremely weird. Lothar was so infuriated by Duque that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know how to face Duque at all. At first glance, Duque looked so tall and mighty. His short black hair was all standing up because of the arcane energy waves. Wearing the classic robe of the Royal Mage group of Storm City, Duque stood at the center of the battlefield with 2 clusters of blue and purple arcane energy in his hands. Countless hands of magic made of white light floated in the air, and the light from the continuous barrage of purple and blue arcane bullets reflected the relaxed expression on Duque's face. He wasn't very tall. Perhaps because he was too young, Duque was even shorter than everyone on the scene, but everyone felt that he was taller and more stalwart than anyone else. His pair of black eyes were like obsidian embedded in his eye sockets, deep and wise. Countless arcane lights flashed in his or his hands of magic's palms, and then went to the place where they should go. It was to block Dan's fireballs, or to save a human elite soldier who was almost killed by the enemy's orc guards. Lothar had seen more than once that his men were in a crisis of certain death, but they were all saved by the lightning arrows that Duque released with multicasting. A flash that was similar to a blind, or a direct attack. Duke's every attempt to save the situation seemed to be understated, yet it was just right. Those who didn't know what was going on might think that God Duque was so awesome that not only could he easily beat up his opponents, but he also had the time to cover his teammates. In fact, that wasn't the case at all. Duque was on the losing side. Lothar finally couldn't help but roar, "Hey! Duque, do you need help?" In fact, nobody had time to help Duque, but the problem was that Lothar was worried. "Calm down. I can't win on my side, but don't think that I'll lose either. I can stall for a day and a night if I want to stall." With that said, Duque even had time to instantly cast Flame Burst to help Lothar smash Black Hand's face. Good job. Taking advantage of the gap created by Duque, Lothar gave Black Hand a heavy blow. The tip of his sword, which was sharper than a nail, easily pierced through the gap of Black Hand's armor, leaving a wound at least 5 centimeters deep. Lothar was absolutely certain that the sword had stabbed the edge of Black Hand's lung. Black Hand let out an angry roar. He turned around and glared at Duque with his bloodshot eyes. Black Hand actually gave up to Lothar and charged straight at Duque. Hiss! Noxus sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew what would happen to Duke if he was hit by Black Hand's hammer of destruction. He had no choice but to chase after them madly. Even if it wasn't Black Hand's true body, that mountain-like terrifying figure could easily make even the most valiant of warriors feel weak when they saw it. Noxus couldn't imagine what would happen to Duke, who didn't have much actual combat experience, against a Black Hand. Duque's death caused the entire situation to collapse. Even if he didn't want to admit it, Duque was already the most important member of this assault team. In a sense, Duque's existence was as important as Lothar's. Bang! Bang! With 2 sounds, 2 elite soldiers of Storm City who tried to stop Black Hand were easily sent flying. The huge iron hammers, one on the left and one on the right, were just ordinary pendulums, but that kind of unstoppable force was not something an ordinary human could withstand. There were no more obstacles between Duque and Black Hand. At this moment, Dan's mirror image also began to attack. The raging flames enveloped Duque's body. From Lothar's perspective, he could only see Duque's blurry figure. Not only the flames, but Lothar also felt the arrival of the curse. Curse of Pain, and Ignite, as well as some unknown spells, several warlock spells that could cause continuous damage poured down on Duque. Putting aside the fact that Duque had to face Black Hand, just Dan's attacks weren't something that Duque could handle. Not good. Not good. In that instant, Lothar felt as if his heart had been pierced. He almost wanted to throw his sword to save Leylin. However, the gap between mediocrity and genius was revealed in this instant. The mana that Duque had released was instantly restrained in his palm in less than 1/10 of a second. Noxus did not know how much control over arcane energy was required to achieve this. All he knew was that he had only seen magic techniques of this level on Mediva's body. Even Morning Star wizards could not compare. If the previous retraction could be considered an illusion, then the highly condensed arcane energy in his palm was instantly magnified again, turning into a clear giant palm with 5 fingers. It slapped the great chief's black hand away. Just this move alone was enough to make Noxus clap his hands in praise. This was not the end. Orc's battle instincts were terrifyingly high. While Black Hand weighed more than 250 kilograms, his body was never clumsy. Lothar could clearly see that Black Hand's body was beginning to adjust in midair. Even if he struck again, he might not be able to find an opening. At this moment, Duque used Flash. His entire body suddenly turned into a beam of light and disappeared. When his figure reappeared, he was already next to Black Hand. He spread out his right hand, and a cone-shaped cold sea breeze suddenly erupted from Duque's palm, covering Black Hand's body. This move did not depend on the attack power of Duque's magic, but on the speed reduction effect that ice magic often had. A visible layer of frost covered Black Hand's body, from his feet all the way to his waist. This caused Black Hand's efforts to adjust his posture in mid-air to go up in smoke. Most importantly, Lothar suddenly discovered that because Black Hand could not adjust his body, his entire back was facing him. Through the gap between Black Hand's armor and helmet, Lothar had a wonderful opportunity to kill Black Hand. In the chest space, the great chief Black Hand relied on his amazing strength, but this shameless man actually wore 2 sets of armor. The outside was a steel plate that was a full 3 centimeters thick, and the inside was an unknown leather armor. This made it difficult for Lothar to find an opportunity to kill Black Hand. But now it was different. Because of this rare body position, Lothar's longsword was able to smoothly stab into Black Hand's heart. Chi, the king's sword pierced the muscle between the back and the shoulder blade, straight into Black Hand's heart. For a moment, Lothar was worried whether this strange chest space would renege on its promise, such as counting orcs as undead creatures or something. Obviously, Lothar's worry was unnecessary. Suddenly, hundreds of lightning bolts struck down from the empty sky. Boom! Almost every soldier who was engaged in a fierce battle became absent-minded. Fortunately, the chess level abided by the rules. After the lightning bolts struck, all the enemies, including the Murlocs, Nagas, and gnolls summoned by Duque, disappeared without a trace. Did we win? Lothar was still a little skeptical. Chapter 117. Congratulations, warrior. You should be rewarded for your heroic battle. Come on. Open your spoils of war. The voice of the statue, for some reason, suddenly became incomparably pleasing to the ear. The elite soldiers of Storm City, who were still fighting to the death just now, were a little unaccustomed to this sudden victory. However, since their boss had killed the boss of the other side, this victory was unquestionable. Almost everyone was breathing heavily, only Dooku had a calm expression on his face. Surprisingly, the system elf started to flatter him. Oh, my dear host, your performance was too outstanding. How did you know that killing the Black Hand would guarantee victory? Humph. Back then, I was an awesome person who soloed the Karazhan chess stage. Duque replied smugly, but in his heart, he thought, hey. Do you think I would tell you that when I played here in the game, every time, it was the other 9 bastards who drank water, went to the toilet, or farted, and I was the only one who was busy? Over time, it became a habit to play alone, sigh, it's all tears. However, Lothar was puzzled by the treasure chest that appeared so blatantly on the side of the huge chessboard. Could it be a trap? Lothar frowned. No. Duque and Garona said in unison. Duque blurted it out in a funny manner, while Garona came to a conclusion after a quick inspection. Lothar tilted his head, and the muscles on his face seemed to twitch. He looked at Duque. You do it, or should I? Seeing Duque take half a step back in fear, Lothar knew the answer. Okay, I'll do it. Lothar really didn't know why Duque was like this. In Lothar's opinion, Duque was a combination of contradictions. He was so young, but he was extremely experienced in battle. He was obviously fearless when facing the enemy, but he was afraid to inspect his spoils of war. What kind of quirk was this? Okay. Mages seem to be mysterious and neurotic guys. Compared to Duque's minor problems, Lothar regarded Duque as a perfect saint. Lothar didn't even extend his hand, and the brown wooden treasure chest that was studded with gems opened on its own, revealing the good stuff inside. A sword. A ring. A leather pauldron. First was the sword. Looking at the unique scimitar shape and the red blade, Duque guessed that it was the king's protector. It was a one-handed sword that did not appear in history but in the game. Even though it had decent attributes, the fact that a scimitar was classified as a sword still made many players ridicule it. Duque was impressed by Lothar's one-handed sword, which was a favorite of defense warriors. What was interesting was that out of all the warriors present, not a single one wanted it. What? None of you want it? Duque was stunned. Noxus waved the king's sword in his hand. A warrior's weapon is the most important. We won't change our weapon unless it's absolutely necessary. In the face of life and death, the slightest difference in touch can be fatal. The other warriors nodded. Well, fine, you guys have a point. Then I, a mage, won't have to worry about stealing equipment. I'll give it to Windsor to show off later. There was no such thing as binding in this world anyway. Duke grandly took the defensive warrior's treasure for himself and casually put it into the space bag he bought at a high price. Yes, there were dimensional bags in this world too. But they were extremely expensive. A linen dimensional bag produced by Dalagen that could only hold 8 items that did not weigh more than 10 kilograms actually cost 100,000 gold coins. And it was a fixed price, no bargaining allowed. Damn, if it wasn't for the fact that Duque was in urgent need of it, he would definitely exchange all the gold coins and beat that profiteer to death. Duque thought to himself, I must go and practice the tailoring skill when I get back. There was also a leather pauldron, cruel shoulder blade, which naturally belonged to Garona. The female half-orc immediately took off her metal pauldron and put on a leather pauldron, looking as if she would beat up anyone who tried to snatch it from her. All right, take it if you like it. Noxus was not angry at Garona. The last ring of circulation, was a typical mage ring. When Duque put the ring on his left thumb, he felt the magic circuit being expanded again. A new small circuit was built, and magic seemed to flow into the ring through the arteries of the finger. After being amplified by the ring, it flowed out of the vein with a surging feeling. System notification, you are wearing a magic item, ring of circulation, that is far beyond your ability. Obviously, the maker of this ring is quite friendly to low-level spellcasters. The gentle magic circuit buff allows you, an earth mage, to get a 30% bonus to the original attributes of the ring. The damage caused by your magic effects and the chance of a magic critical hit are slightly increased. Looking at Fiend Belt, Capacitor, and Ring of Circulation on his hand, Duque's desire to level up became even more urgent. He didn't know what the higher-level magic world was like. Obviously, it was a world that he couldn't imagine. There was no reason, just a hunch that if he defeated Medivh, he would be able to level up. That was what the aura of fate told Duque. At this moment, Noxus came up to him. Did you alarm Sargeras just now? Duque shook his head. I don't think so. A big shot like Sargeras is also very busy. After returning from the chess space, I sensed several interworld astral communications. Don't forget, Sargeras is the boss of the Burning Legion. Noxus nodded. The enemy was too strong enough to make most mortals despair. 10,000 years ago, almost all the strong people on planet Azeroth had gathered to barely destroy the portal and drive Sargeras away. Could they do it with just these few people? The hesitation was only brief. Noxus quickly shook his head to get rid of the bad thoughts. He turned his head and said to his subordinates, "Gentlemen, the road ahead is still difficult, but I believe we can still overcome it. For the battle later, let's rest for 15 minutes and then continue on our way." None of Noxus's men had died in the battle just now. The most miserable guy was only moderately injured, and with the priest's healing spell, he had barely recovered his combat power. In any case, this result was already very impressive. Defeating a demon boss in a row and breaking through a strange chess stage had raised everyone's morale a lot. "What's next?" Noxus asked. "I don't know. The space in Karazhan is chaotic. If we're lucky, we'll go to Mediva's bedroom or study. If not..." Ladies and gentlemen, I have a piece of unfortunate news. Mr. Mediv, the protector you rely on for protection, might have been possessed by the demons of the Burning Legion. We are on our way to take down Mediv. Before Windsor could finish, the nobles on the other side exploded. "Oh, no, impossible. Oh my God, this is too scary. Soldier. As the Count of the East of Elven Forest, I order you to protect us as we leave. Immediately. Immediately." Although Windsor repeatedly emphasized his duty, the nobles screamed as if they had lost their minds. They used all kinds of threats and temptations to force Windsor to obey them. The only fortunate thing was that these nobles did not have servants or attendants with them. Otherwise, they would have been even more overbearing. As a last resort, Windsor could only divide a third of his forces to escort these nobles back the way they came from and leave Karazhan. Then, when Windsor reorganized his forces and went to a banquet hall on the second floor, he saw a human. No, it should be said that it was a demonized human. The thick evil aura on his body could be clearly felt from more than 10 meters away. "Hello, humans not on the guest list. I am Karazhan's butler, Moros. Unfortunately, Master Mediv has ordered that all outsiders not on the guest list are to be treated as enemies. So, please die, soldier." Seeing this gentle-looking old man in red explode his eye-catching red and yellow suit in an instant and turn into a huge satyr demon, Windsor suddenly had a question. Why did Moros, the butler, who was already a demon, let the nobles go? Not good. Windsor's heart trembled. It was as if he had been electrocuted, and Windsor's limbs were numb from the electricity. However, he and his men did not have the leisure to do so. Because at the corner of the huge corridor, behind the gorgeous pillars, in various rooms of various sizes, many satyrs poured out. These demons that had been transformed from humans waved all kinds of weapons, or simply used their claws to attack Windsor and his men, at the same time, near the top of the Karazhan Mage Tower. After resting, Duque, Lothar, and Garona continued to advance with their men. After defeating the enemy in the chess checkpoint, a door opened behind the strange statue. Behind the door was an ordinary long flight of stairs, but when Duque and his men climbed the stairs, they suddenly found that the space was distorted again. This flight of stairs was not the one that led to Mediva's bedroom as expected. Instead, it led straight to the roof. In fact, when he saw the roof, Duque already had a bad feeling. When he saw the huge figure with bluish-green skin, Duque still said in his heart, "Holy crap." It was a gigantic demon. He was dressed like a strong man. He wore 2 pauldrons, gauntlets, belt, and leggings. Most of his skin was exposed. His explosive muscles could be seen with the naked eye. For example, he had an extremely fit six-pack, and his thigh muscles that revealed vertical lines. Of course, he also had the signature thick tail of the Eridar demons. More than 10,000 years ago, the demon king Sargeras went to Argus to recruit the entire Eridar race to join his blazing crusade. Archimonde and Kil, Jaden, 2 of the 3 leaders of Eridar, agreed to join. The Eridar race was what humans called the demon race. Generally speaking, demons were divided into 2 colors, scarlet red and bluish green. In the Burning Legion, the two Eridar demon bosses did not belong to each other, and would not cooperate. The representative of the scarlet-skinned demon was Jaden, and this demon was obviously on Archimonde's side. Prince Malchezer. Chapter 119. The sky was gloomy. Next to it was the outline of the Mage Tower, the Outer Tower, and the Auxiliary Tower, but this was not the sky that could be seen from the outside of Karazhan. The distortion of space and time made it so that when people looked out from the huge rooftop square, they could only see gray chaos. Evil energy tumbled in the void like boiling soup. Strictly speaking, Prince Malaxer should not be here. Prince Malaxer's appearance here gave Duque the feeling that he was the transmigrator. Duque looked at this huge demon that was as tall as 3 people and frowned. This big guy, who was supposed to be the final boss in the future, now looked more like a watchdog that had responded to Sardra's summons. He declared the demon's ownership of this place to every intruder that successfully arrived, which meant that the power of the King of Demons would descend upon everyone present and punish those who displeased his master. In fact, that was what Prince Malaxer did. He frowned almost as soon as he saw Duque, Lothar, and the others. This dark green demon with 3 mysterious tentacles under his chin roared, "Puny humans. I don't know how you came here. But since you can come here, it means that the trash I arranged in front has either been defeated, or you have deceived the entire defense system so that I can't receive any news of your invasion." Lothar did not speak. He still held the shield in his left hand and waved his sword in his right hand. Then, he winked at Duque. "Good job." He did not say it out loud, but that was what he meant. Prince Malaxer proudly took a big step forward. His huge hooves stepped on the limestone tiles, which made a sizzling sound due to the inexplicable high temperature. "I don't know how you did it, but that's not important. What's important is that you will all die here, and your souls will become mine. Submit to me, mortals. Or else your souls will suffer for 10,000 years." The prince's loud roar echoed throughout the entire rooftop. The strange surrounding space made Prince Malaxer's voice tremble. Lothar's elite soldiers suddenly trembled. They never lacked courage, but some enemies could not be dealt with courage alone. However, you're just a dog that only knows how to fart. If it were your boss, Sardras, saying these words might be able to scare people, but you? Far from it. Duque replied. "I hate this guy. Can I get rid of him?" Garona gave off an obvious feeling of agitation. Lothar, all right, ladies first. Duque rolled his eyes. The group of elite soldiers expressed that they were temporarily deaf. Duque was speechless. He really didn't realize that Lothar wasn't a good person either. He actually let Garona take the lead. If it was Duque, he would have done the same. Garona, with her high agility and speed, was very suitable for probing the enemy. Alright, Duque wasn't a good person either. Garona closed her eyes. This female orc's combat power was definitely top-notch. As expected, those who entered the heroic domain and had a strong history in Azeroth, none of them were fake. For some reason, Duque felt that Garona's strength seemed to have increased by another level. Her figure was so fast that it felt like Prince Malchezer was surrounded by Garona's afterimages. If it was just the thief's sprint and slice, it definitely wouldn't have such a cool effect. This was clearly one of Garona's unique skills. Garona's bone dagger wasn't a divine weapon, but some mysterious power seemed to have been injected into it, and the dagger's attack power had increased significantly. Deep wounds that could be considered shocking to humans kept appearing on the prince's body. Almost every time he dodged, there would be a few terrifying wounds that were 5 centimeters deep and more than half a meter long on the prince's exposed skin. However, for a demon with extremely strong vitality, these were at most superficial wounds. "You green-skinned sow. Do you dare to fight me head-on?" Prince Malchezer was furious. The next moment, he painfully discovered that one of the antennae on his chin that looked like a penis was almost chopped off by Garona. "Ah, You dare to do this to me? Prince Malchezer was finally fed up with Garona's high-speed attacks that were more disgusting than a flurry of flies. He no longer cared about acting cool and directly used his strength. Following his angry roar, 4 stone giants wrapped in green flames descended from the sky and guarded the prince from all sides. Hellfire. No, to be precise, this was not a true hellfire. That was because a true hellfire had a certain level of intelligence. It would walk like a human and attack its own target. Prince Malchezer's hellfire was a pillar of flames with a human shape. Of course, the effect was obvious. The surging power of the flames immediately pushed out in all directions, and in an instant, with the prince at the center of the entire rooftop square, 4 waves of flames appeared and exploded outwards. These waves of flames posed a threat to almost everyone on Lothar's side. First, Garona couldn't withstand the continuous waves of flames, and with a flash and a backflip, she retreated. Next was Lothar. Clearly, Lothar had some kind of magical item that protected against elemental power, but it was unknown if it was prepared to be used against Medivh. Anyway, when the waves of flames reached Lothar, the power of the fire elements automatically dissipated and turned into a gale slightly stronger than a strong wind. Other than blowing up Lothar's long hair, which could be used to sell shampoo advertisements, it had no real effect. Next was Duque. An ethereal shield of ice appeared on Duque's body, blocking the hot air that was blowing towards him. But for the average Storm City elite soldiers, the area affected by these 4 waves of flames became an insurmountable death zone. This was not a power that could be easily matched by mortals. Among the elite soldiers who had spread out to prepare for battle, the elite soldier closest to the prince was the first to be unlucky. Ordinary shields might be able to defend against arrows and swords, but they definitely could not defend against flames. The guy who bore the brunt of the flames was not only sent flying by the surging waves of flames, but also dragged away the other elite soldier who tried to hold him. Everywhere he looked, people were thrown off their feet, and that was not all. Almost everyone was covered in large and small flames. Cries of alarm rang out incessantly. Stand down. Put out the fire. Lothar's expression was not good. This not only meant that the 3 of them were the only ones left in this battle, but it was also very likely that these soldiers would not be of any use in the battle with Medivh later. The opponent's strength was completely beyond imagination. Chapter 120. Lothar didn't order Duque to do anything. He knew that Duque would definitely satisfy him. Tacit understanding was something that was cultivated through battle after battle. Whether a teammate was reliable could be seen through 1 or 2 battles. It was Lothar's first time seeing such an all-round genius like Duque. Lothar was very relieved. Sure enough, Duque raised his hand and used the lowest level, Blizzard. There were no lethal icicles, only rapidly falling snowflakes. The cold hexagonal snowflakes quickly covered the parts of the soldiers that were on fire and quickly extinguished the flames on their bodies. Every soldier who regained their senses looked at Duque with gratitude. Compared to the middle-aged priest who was still in a daze, Duque's response was godly. The faces of quite a few soldiers holding longswords were deathly pale, large droplets of cold sweat dripping down the sides of their hair. However, not a single one of them suffered a fatal injury, let alone died. This result was obviously far from satisfying Prince Malchezer. This high-ranking demon of the Eridar race would never have dreamed that a transmigrator would be among the challengers. Duque knew most of his skills like the back of his hand. He roared, "Mortal, do you think this is the end?" With a wave of his hand, a black light bloomed from the prince's hand. In an instant, 15 elite soldiers felt as if their bodies had been hollowed out. It was a very frightening feeling. Within their paper-thin skin, there were no muscles, no blood vessels, no blood, not even bones. It was as if all their organs had disappeared and they had become a paper man with an empty shell. It was an indescribable feeling of terror. Almost every soldier who was hit froze in place. They didn't even notice the dark energy that shrouded their heads. 3 seconds. Only 3 seconds. The moment that evil dark energy exploded, these 15 soldiers would lose their lives forever. Even their souls would be bound in the chaotic mage tower of Karazhan, becoming some kind of sad existence. Run. Lothar didn't know what it was. He only knew that these old fellows that he had trained and had accompanied him through life and death countless times would all die here if they didn't run. Being mentally prepared that everyone was going to die and actually dying were two completely different situations. Noxus was very strong, but no matter how strong he was, there was no way he could save 15 soldiers at the same time. On the battlefield, 1 second of hesitation was enough to be fatal. Even if many of these elite soldiers had already reacted and started to run towards the area outside of the Shroud of Darkness, how far could they run in 3 seconds when they were fully armored, holding shields and swords, and carrying at least tens of kilograms of weight? Death was almost inevitable. However, just when the dozen elite soldiers were about to be killed, Duque's hand of magic appeared again. 72 hands of magic dragged all the soldiers out of the attack range of Shadow Nova before the princes, Shadow Nova, burst out. Looking at himself flying out of that dark area, and then looking at the place where the dark energy had corroded the ground to the point where it was creaking and emitting an ominous smell, even a fool knew that Duque had saved their lives once again. Before the raid on Rakazan, they only admired one person, Anduin Lothar. From today onwards, they silently added another name in their hearts, Duke Marcus. Not only did Duque's unimaginable response surprise them, but Duque's calmness, decisiveness, selflessness, and indescribable view of the overall situation made them admire him from the bottom of their hearts. Thanks, Sir Marcus. I owe you my life. In the future, when Boss Lothar doesn't want me anymore, I, Panga, will be your follower. I can still watch the door. Most people would be indignant and angry when their subordinates' hearts were bought, but Lothar was touched that his subordinates' lives were saved. Well, you bastards, if I really die, I'll allow you to follow Duque. Now get lost, don't get in the way, this is not an enemy you can deal with. Lothar's elite soldiers retreated far away from the rooftop square. Lothar cracked his neck. Duque, do you have any good suggestions? If you're not afraid of fire, you can try to lure this guy out. I bet that he has a limited number of pillars of fire. If we weren't in the fire, I would definitely be able to kill this guy. Garona seemed to be indignant that she was forced to retreat. Ditto. Duque shrugged. That's settled. Hearing Duque's words, Prince Malkezer's body trembled. He almost thought that he was hearing things. The pressure in the space suddenly changed. It was a violent aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Accompanied by a furious roar, a voice that burned with raging flames actually caused the ground to tremble. Who gave you the confidence to defeat me? The Burning Legion is invincible. Duque was unmoved. Pfft, Lothar and Garona looked at Duque at the same time. I just smiled and didn't say anything. Is that wrong? No, I just think that you're braver than I thought. Lothar gently touched Duque's arm with his shield, then charged forward without looking back. Lothar charged. With every step Lothar took, the light on his body grew brighter. This was not a feeling, nor was it an illusion. Lothar was really glowing all over. For a moment, Duque almost suspected that this slightly unreliable world of Azeroth had a paladin profession in advance. What made Duque even more confused was that he saw the following lines of data on his retina. After inspection, Anduin Lothar used a super rare potion, Titan Potion. His HP has temporarily increased significantly. Lothar used Colorful Miracle Potion. His magic resistance has temporarily increased significantly. Lothar used Special Flame Protection Potion. Lothar activated the special amulet of the Archbishop of Stormwind City. Lothar received an unknown super powerful exorcism blessing. His damage against demons has greatly increased. What was pioneering? This was pioneering. Even though Noxus himself was a boss, this dutiful warrior still brought his own first clear potions when he was exploring another boss. He had not even asked Duque for half a gold coin as compensation. Azeroth's #1 teammate. At this moment, Duque was so touched that his nose was running. Garona and Duque watched as Lothar charged forward and cut Prince Malkezer's Hellfire with 2 slashes. Chapter 121. To Duque, it had always been a big question mark as to how strong the fellow who stepped into the realm of heroes in Azeroth was. Purely from the perspective of physical strength, agility, and vitality, Lothar did not exceed the limits of a human. However, with the support of the warrior's unique rage power, Lothar made a series of unimaginable moves. A normal charge and a warrior's special charge were 2 completely different concepts. Even though a warrior's charge could only be used once in a battle, the powerful impact this time was very precious. It was the first time Duque had seen Lothar's charge. It should be said that Lothar did not even use his full strength against Evil Hoof. Lothar's military boots made a high-speed grinding sound, and in the next instant, his entire body suddenly turned into a stream of light, crossing the more than 10 meters between him and Prince Malkezer. According to a normal human's charge, Lothar would only rush to the prince's feet, but Lothar's charge unreasonably rushed into the air. You! Prince Malkezer's words came to an abrupt halt, because he saw a shield that was not big, but was big enough to cover his entire ugly face, rapidly enlarging in his vision. Bam! The shield bash that came right at Kieran's head sent the prince into a daze. The strong impact landed on the prince's nose, and the unsuppressible soreness and pain made the prince want to cry. This was not the end. The feeler on Prince Malkezer's chin that looked like a penis that was almost chopped off by Garona just now was really chopped off this time. Lothar deliberately took the blame for Garona's mistake with his strength. Just like that, the hatred created by Garona was perfectly inherited by Lothar. Duque had once heard of such an unreliable legend, that the males of the Eridar tribe treated the 3 tentacles under their chin as precious as their own little brothers. Whether this legend was reliable or just fabricated by some unscrupulous author, there was no way to know. In any case, when the tentacle was directly chopped off by Lothar with the king's sword, Prince Malkezer was enraged. He was truly enraged. Go to hell. Human. He was not knocked down by Lothar's charge and shield. The prince displayed the strong physique of the demon race. His body, which was leaning back due to the heavy blow, suddenly bounced back like a spring under the effect of his powerful waist and abdomen. His fist, which was larger than a calf, came crashing down. Quick. And ferocious. This was the problem that humans often encountered when fighting against giants. The huge difference in size would cause humans to be unable to withstand the inhuman strength if they were not careful and were hit by a fierce blow. Humans would be crushed and instantly killed by the terrifying difference in strength that could not be made up for with training. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. The high-rank demon couldn't hide the surprise on his face. How is this possible? In Prince Malkezer's eyes, Lothar, who was covered in heavy armor that only increased his weight but was meaningless to the demon race, should be a piece of delicious meat on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. But Lothar flew up. It was not an adjective, but a real kick. He once again rose more than 2 meters in the air. From facing the prince's big ugly face, he flew to the prince's head and struck again. Only then did the prince see from where Lothar had just landed that there were 2 hands of magic there. It was this pair of illusory palms constructed from arcane energy that perfectly became Lothar's fulcrum when Lothar had nowhere to borrow strength from, supporting Lothar in unimaginable acrobatics. Ah! The moment the king's sword pierced Malkezer's skull, a dazzling golden light blossomed. A pair of seemingly burning golden wings of light extended from Lothar's back, breaking through the chaotic void on the roof of Karazhan, creating an additional passage between Karazhan and the world of Azeroth, which was located in the gap between the astral world and Karazhan. This passage glowed with golden light. On the sword, a golden storm filled with a holy aura blew up. The chaotic wind caused Lothar's handsome long hair to flutter erratically, making this future lion of Azeroth even more charismatic. At some point, Garona, who was supposed to cooperate and attack, also stopped in her tracks. Standing on the head of this huge demon who was at least 6 meters tall, Lothar's expression was very calm, as if his soul was wandering in the sky. He seemed to be feeling something, savoring something, or listening to the melodious sound of chimes coming from a tall building in the distance. At this moment, even Duque heard the sound of metal clashing coming from above. Raising his head abruptly, Duke realized that he had unknowingly stepped into a strange period of history. Ever since he came to this world, at every moment, there were thousands of voices singing his legend. Every minute and every second, there were thousands of wills swearing to inherit his ideals. As if responding to Lothar's golden wings of light, Duque saw an illusory figure in the floating golden clouds on the battlefield. It was a knight. His face was clearly a blur in the eyes of the bystanders. But everyone could feel his gaze on Lothar. No, he was not only looking at Lothar, he was also looking at the entire human race. That's right. The crown on his head proved his identity, the only emperor recognized by the 7 major human kingdoms in the history of Azeroth, Thoradin the Great. His gaze fell on the sword in Lothar's hands that was piercing the demon's head. He smiled. It was a smile of approval. Those who fight for humanity will receive my protection. After leaving a soft murmur, Thoradin the Great's figure disappeared. The next moment, the sword in Lothar's hand emitted a bright light. Prince Malcheser's huge greenish-blue body, starting from the head that was pierced, seemed to turn into gravel in the wind and disappeared in the golden light. Duque was stunned. He never thought that Prince Malcheser would be a problem for him, Lothar, and Garona. Just one big move from Lothar was able to instantly kill Prince Malcheser, who would become the final boss of Karazhan in the future. That was a bit too much. The prince's figure disappeared. Lothar descended with a gorgeous, eagle-like dive, his metal boots hitting the bluestone ground with a clear clang. There was no joy of victory on Lothar's face. Instead, it was as if he was facing a great enemy. Not only him, but Duque and Garona also had the same expression. Come out, old friend. I can already feel your aura. He he he. With a chuckle, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. For some reason, they had already arrived at Mediva's workshop inside Karazhan. In the middle of the three, the super boss Mediv, who directed the entire incident at the Dark Portal, appeared. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.